Hey guys, tonight we're going on a walk. Not just any walk, but one through a Victorian city right around tea time, where the air smells like roasted nuts, burnt sugar, and something vaguely buttery. You won't believe this, but almost none of it is what it claims to be. You're about to enter a world where food looks delightful, tastes sweet, and costs next to nothing, but carries a quiet cost no one talks about. A world where bright colours are a warning, not a treat. Where the most inviting loaf of bread might contain a pinch of powdered stone, and where millions of people built their lives, their bodies, and their memories out of food that wasn't quite real. Alright, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. But only if your heart says yes. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. Always curious who's out there in the world. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You begin in the best possible place for a curious wanderer, right on the cobblestone edge of a Victorian street market. It's early evening. The sun's golden but fading fast. Oil lamps are being lit one by one, shop by shop. The smoke from coal stoves curls lazily through the alleys, and the scent of warm pastry clings to the air like velvet. A cheerful clatter surrounds you. The shuffle of boots, the ringing of coins, the occasional bark of a dog. Vendors call out like stage actors. One's waving sugared almonds in paper cones. Another is selling strips of candied orange peel, glittering under a gas lamp. On your left, someone is frying something you can't quite identify, but the smell is oddly delicious. It feels festive, the kind of place where you'd treat yourself to something small, just a sweet to pass the hour. You approach a stall where children are clustered like moths. Their eyes light up at the trays of bright pink and lemon yellow cubes stacked in neat rows. Some are wrapped in wax paper. Others are just out in the open, catching every bit of light. They're called conversation lozenges, though the only conversation happening now is the silent agreement between a coin and a handful of colour. You lean in. The vendor nods and snaps a bit off a larger block with a small chisel, placing it delicately in a twist of paper. It's heavy. You pop a tiny bit on your tongue, and it's sweet. Almost too sweet. But there's a powdery aftertaste that clings to your teeth. The thing is, there's hardly any sugar in it. That pink hue, most likely made with red lead or cochineal, depending on the vendor's ethics or budget. The chalky mouthfeel. That's because a lot of these sweets were padded out with finely ground plaster of Paris, also known as calcium sulfate. Perfect for making walls, not great for teeth, and the flavouring, possibly something called essence of pear drops, a chemical blend that smells like childhood and tastes like headaches if overdone. But here's the trick. You wouldn't know, not if you were living here, not if you grew up like this. Because this isn't a treat, it's food. This is dinner to some, a lunch substitute for others. For the price of a halfpenny you get calories and something that feels like joy. That's what makes it so clever. You don't need to hide poison when it comes in the form of pink sherbet or striped barley sugar. You just need to make it taste close enough. You hear a soft snap behind you. Someone else just bit into a sugar wafer. A little girl nearby tugs at her brother's sleeve and holds up a marshmallow twist the size of her hand. It's not the food itself that's shocking. It's how normal it all feels. One elderly man standing by the toffee booth mutters that the old sweets were better. You used to know your mint from your lemon, he grumbles. Now everything tastes like perfume and coal dust. You glance at the toffee in his hand, glistening unnaturally. He eats it anyway. What's strange is how these stalls have evolved not out of deceit, but out of demand. Real sugar is expensive. Pure flavourings are rare. People want something sweet after work and they want it cheap, and so the market, clever as ever, finds a way. The term junk food doesn't exist yet, but its spirit already lives in these stalls. You drift deeper into the market, into a narrow row between two larger shops where the crowd thins out. Here, the stalls are more relaxed, less shouting, more knowing glances. You stop at a booth with striped paper bags hanging from little hooks. The sign says fruit drops, but the vendor offers no description, just a smile and a scoop. Inside the bags you see perfectly round, brightly coloured globes that shimmer like stained glass. They look like hard candy, but smoother. The vendor says they'll soothe the throat, help with a dry tickle, and taste just like apple or raspberry. The colour's vivid, bordering on neon. But you know the secret already. These drops are rarely made with fruit. More often, it's flavouring oil mixed with boiled sugar, or something resembling sugar, then dusted with powdered minerals to prevent sticking. Apple green comes from verdigris, a copper salt. That raspberry red might be cochineal if you're lucky, or lead chromate if you're not. Yet even the vendor doesn't seem villainous. He shrugs when asked where the candies come from. Liverpool maybe, or imported, hard to say. Then adds, "They sell well when the fog's heavy. People like something bright when the air turns yellow." And there it is again, that quiet agreement between what people want and what the market offers. You spot a wooden crate nearby, filled with what looks like Turkish delight. But this batch has been cut with starch and dusted so heavily it leaves your fingers white. It's not dangerous exactly, just hollow, less satisfying, like food that's pretending. The truth is, these sellers aren't malicious alchemists. They're business people, working within the narrow margins of a population hungry for cheap comfort. Sugar was once the most precious cargo on earth. But now, in this moment, in this market, it's the illusion of sugar that sells best. And people aren't stupid. They know the difference. You overhear a woman advising her friend not to buy from the tall man with the striped apron. "His barley twists are made from boiled rope and varnish, I swear it," she says, half laughing. But her friend buys one anyway. It's a halfpenny. It's sweet enough. You pause by a basket of toffee pennies. They glisten with just a little too much sheen. When you lift one, it sticks slightly to the wax paper and leaves behind a faint residue. More oil than caramel. One bite in, and the flavour turns oddly metallic. You don't swallow it. You imagine a world where everything that sparkles, everything that smells sweet is exactly what it claims to be. But this is not that world. This is the world where most people are getting by with whatever will hold them until the next shift, the next paycheck, the next morning. And so you stand still for a moment. Watch the children laughing, sticky-fingered and wild with energy. Watch the vendors weighing sugar mice on chipped scales. Watch the older gentleman sipping his licorice cordial with the serene patience of someone who's tasted every version of this street over decades. There's a beauty to it all, even in its fakery. The colours, the rituals, the small daily hopes. You turn to leave the market, hand still sticky, mouth still tingling from something vaguely fruity. The city is darkening now. Lamps flicker in shop windows, and behind you, the calls of the sweet sellers continue. Soft, persistent, almost musical. You've just had your first taste, and you're only at the beginning. You wake the next morning still thinking about that pink candy cube, the one that crumbled just a little too easily in your mouth. There was something about its texture, its chalky aftertaste, that lingers more in memory than on the tongue. So today, curiosity takes the lead. You're not just strolling now, you're investigating. The morning air in the city smells sharper, less caramel and spice, more coal and whetstone. You duck into a side alley off the main street, where smaller, quieter vendors are setting up under canvas sheets. There's a stall here you missed before. Its sign simply says sweets and savouries in curly red paint. That's where you begin. On the counter are familiar things, fudge squares, striped barley sugar sticks, even what looks like a cherry tart under a glass dome. But it's what's behind the stall that catches your eye. A shelf lined with jars, not candies, not treats, just powders and pigments and corked bottles. You squint at a few. Prussian blue, red oxide, alum, pearl white. These aren't exotic flavours, they're colours, and most of them come from minerals you'd expect to find in a paint shop, not a bakery. Here's something you didn't know last night. In Victorian England, colour meant everything. A white loaf was seen as purer, cleaner, classier. A bright green sweet looked more refreshing. A deep red drop signalled richness. So naturally, shopkeepers, and especially sweetmakers, did what they could to meet those expectations. Some used cochineal, a dye from crushed beetles, to create those glorious reds. Others opted for cheaper, man-made alternatives, like red lead, which could cause chronic fatigue and aching joints over time. But lead was bright, and it held its hue well in the shop window. The same went for yellows and greens. Turmeric was lovely, but more costly than turmeric's chemical cousin, chrome yellow, derived from lead chromate. A green apple candy might get its shimmer from verdigris or copper sulfate. Both looked stunning under gaslight. Neither belonged near a stomach. It wasn't always malicious. More often it was habitual. The people preparing these colours didn't necessarily see themselves as poisoners. They saw themselves as enhancers, helpers, matching their sweets to what the public already expected. The jar marked pearl white likely contained something like finely powdered chalk or gypsum, used to whiten sugar, make flour appear cleaner, and smooth out any inconsistencies in texture. Completely legal and common. You touch the corner of a wrapped toffee and your fingers come away with a faint dust. Harmless? Maybe. But you're beginning to understand why so many Victorian food inspectors carried small glass vials, droppers, and wire loops. Food was chemistry now. One chemist, decades from now, would write in his diary that a harmless pink peppermint contained a dash of iron oxide. Another noted that barley sugar left red, marks on blotting paper, a sign of cheap red pigment. Still, people bought it. They like the consistency, the colour, the idea that their sweets could look as dazzling as anything in a Parisian boutique. Even when a few sceptical journalists tried to warn readers about sugar stone or chalk fondant, they were met with shrugs. As one market-goer quipped, well, it's still better than eating nothing. So the powders stayed, the colours deepened, and people learned to associate brightness with quality, without asking too many questions. You turn back to the jars one last time. There's one more label that stands out, handwritten in shaky ink. S, almond, artificial. You hold it to the light. It smells sharp, clean, almost too perfect. That's benzaldehyde, often synthesized from coal tar. Delicious, yes. But the real almonds never showed up. You leave the stall with your mind full of colours. Colours that don't quite belong in food, and yet here they are, baked and boiled into every street corner delight. The cheerful pinks and yellows still twinkle from windows as you walk, but now they feel like costumes, clever disguises meant to reassure the eye, not the body. Further along you stop at a cart selling sugar plums, though they don't contain plums or any fruit at all. They're hard as stones, coated in powder and oddly shiny. The man tending the cart is rolling them in a wide tin bowl filled with something that looks suspiciously like powdered sugar. But given what you now know, it might be flour, starch, or even powdered alabaster. You ask him where he gets the coating, and he grins. A little of this, a little of that, he says, and gestures vaguely to a burlap sack at his feet. You don't press. There's a certain charm to the ambiguity. a Victorian shrug that seems to say, "Don't ask, and you won't worry." The conversation shifts to competition. The vendor confesses that he can't afford pure ingredients. "If I did it proper," he says, "I'd be out of business before the week's up. Customers want colour, texture, sweetness, all for less than a farthing." His voice isn't bitter, just tired. "So we do what we can." You nod. It's not just the food that's stretched thin, it's everyone. As you continue down the lane, you pass a window display filled with marzipan fruits. They're miniature masterpieces, pears, apples, cherries, all moulded with loving precision. But the almond base has likely been swapped out for beans or breadcrumbs, mixed with artificial flavouring. A small price to keep them affordable. The illusion is more important than the ingredients, and it's not just sweets. Even the vinegar in the corner shop might be laced with sulfuric acid for extra sharpness. Even the mustard could be cut with turmeric, flour, or powdered bones. The trick, always, is appearance. Victorians lived in a visual world, a world of public performance, of sharp contrasts, of elegant shop fronts hiding modest realities, and food followed suit. Dazzle first, digest later. You pass a sweet shop on the corner that you'd have adored yesterday. Glass jars, twisted candies, even a toffee hammer for breaking up slabs on the counter. The woman inside hums softly while wrapping caramels. You step in and browse. The caramels are golden and soft. They stick gently to the paper as she folds them. They smell of vanilla, but again, the kind of vanilla that arrives not from pods, but from phenol-based essences derived from wood pulp or clove oil. The price is good. The flavour? Probably familiar, even comforting. You think back to a curious note from one of the few chemists who tried to catalogue the additives in Victorian treats. He described some fruit drops as tasting of cinnamon and copper wire. Another commented that a batch of white peppermint smelled faintly like a matchbox. But here's the thing. Many people grew up with those flavours. They weren't strange. They were normal, standard, expected. If a barley sugar didn't leave a metallic aftertaste, it felt off. And so the artificial became authentic by repetition. The public palate adjusted. This was the taste of the times. As you step back onto the cobblestones, a boy skips by, happily sucking on something bright purple. He grins at you with a sugar-coated smile and vanishes into the crowd. A horse cart rattles past. The wind carries a puff of cinnamon-sweet air that almost makes you hungry again. The market's rhythm continues, and somewhere in that swirl of scents and colours, the line between illusion and indulgence has completely disappeared. The next time you visit the market, you look not at the stalls but at the customers. It's mid-afternoon, and the streets are busier than usual. The factories have let out for the midday break, and a stream of workers filters toward the shop fronts, moving quickly, purposefully, like bees swarming a hive. You follow the tide and notice what's in their hands. Not meat pies or vegetables, not even loaves of bread. Just small parcels, paper cones of sweets, biscuits wrapped in waxed sheets, a strip of licorice, a penny bun. You realise that this isn't just snacking. For many of them it's lunch, and not by choice. A young lad passes you, barely more than a teen, munching on a cube of what looks like honeycomb toffee. His clothes are soot-streaked, his hair pressed flat by a cap. He doesn't stop walking, doesn't look up, just eats as he goes, with the same rhythm you might chew gum. A woman with an apron tucked over her coat clutches a tin of treacle pastilles, picking at them absent-mindedly as she weaves through the crowd. She glances at the clock tower. 10 minutes left, maybe. Then it's back to the line, back to the machines. You stand outside a bakery and watch a crowd press forward, not for loaves, but for scraps. Thin slices of sweetened bread, day-old jam tarts, whatever's cheapest. The sign says, factory specials. There's no shame in it. It's just routine. That's the thing. Industrialization didn't just change how food was made. It changed when and why it was eaten. A full meal with vegetables and protein wasn't possible on a 10-minute break and a 10-penny wage. But a fistful of sugar buttons that you could afford, that you could carry, it became normal to live on things that looked like food, felt like food, but didn't nourish in any real way. A biscuit here, a sweet there, a hard toffee for energy, a bun for bulk. The stomach got something to work with. The body kept moving. That was enough. You see it most clearly in the younger ones. Not children necessarily, but young workers, just starting out, already leaning on the same patterns. One girl passes you with a small tin of acid drops and a heel of sweetened bread. She's not smiling, but she eats steadily, mechanically, like this is just what you do. You begin to notice how well the market caters to this lifestyle. Every stall is designed for speed. Grab, unwrap, chew. No sitting down, no cutlery, no conversation. It's food that disappears as quickly as it's sold. One vendor is selling fig cakes that contain no figs, just thick jam pressed between pastry layers. They're cheap and dense, and they vanish quickly into passing hands. The same goes for the fruit pies filled with turnip jam dyed red. But no one complains, not loudly, because it works. Because even if you know there's no real plum in the plum cake, it still fills a space in your day. The deeper truth settles in slowly. Victorian junk food didn't conquer the working class with flavour. It conquered with function. It was fast, portable, filling, and in its own way comforting. It was food that fit between the cracks of labour and time, and it was everywhere. You step into a small corner shop tucked beneath a row of smoke-stained flats. It's quieter here, and the shelves are lined with neatly stacked tins and paper-wrapped parcels. The shopkeeper, a man with a tidy moustache and a meticulous way of arranging his jars, nods politely but doesn't say much. You take your time, observe. There are biscuits shaped like buttons, each one hard enough to survive weeks on a shelf. Jars of fruit confections line the top row, though the labels list barely a whisper of real fruit. There's something called cocoa slabs stacked like bricks. Sweet, dusty, and vaguely chocolatey, though it's hard to say what's actually inside. A small sign near the till catches your eye. Meal tabs, a treat between work. You lift the tin. It rattles like pills. That's when you realise food is being redesigned, not just in appearance or cost, but in purpose. In this little shop, everything is compact, preserved, engineered to disappear into a pocket, a pail, or a long day on the job. It makes sense. As factories replaced farms and shop floors replaced kitchens, food had to become faster, smaller, and less fussy. Gone were the hours to cook a stew or bake a pie. In their place, sugar cakes, sweet buns, condensed milk, and dry biscuit rations. And this transformation wasn't just about physical hunger. It touched emotional cravings too. These little packets of sweetness, these bright paper wrappings, gave people a feeling of small indulgence, a moment of control, something pretty in the middle of soot and time cards. You strike up a quiet conversation with the shopkeeper, asking how business is. He shrugs. Steady, he says. They come for the same things each day. The jam rolls, the lemon drops. I try to keep them in stock. No time for flour sacks or whole loaves anymore. He gestures toward a row of biscuit tins. They like the ones that crunch loudest. Says something, doesn't it? Then he chuckles, half to himself. You imagine the lives tied to each of these sweets. The woman who breaks a sugar cube in half to make it last her shift. The boy who nibbles at a licorice stick all afternoon. The clerk who pockets a hard mint before walking into another long hour behind a desk. It's not gluttony. It's survival, gently wrapped. Out on the street again, you notice the pattern more clearly. There's a bakery selling steam buns that can be cooked quickly and eaten cold. A sweet stall advertising no crumb cakes for easy transport. Even tea is offered in a condensed syrup form, ready to dilute and sip in 5 minutes flat. Victorian junk food isn't just food, it's time management, it's calorie budgeting, it's the business of staying upright. And slowly, it's replacing older customs. Meals at home become rarer. Shared suppers shrink into solitary snacks. Family recipes give way to factory formulas. You pass a young man leaning against a lamppost, unwrapping a barley sugar twist. His hands are rough, his collar undone. He looks tired, but satisfied. He's fed, in his own way. The sugar glints in the evening light like amber, and somewhere deep down you understand. It's not just a treat. It's how the century keeps turning. You head toward a bakery next, one of the neighbourhood favourites judging by the foot traffic. The shop window is inviting, fogged slightly with warmth from inside. Loaves are stacked in pyramids behind the glass, golden brown, with crisp crusts and soft centres. There's the faint scent of yeast and sugar in the air. It smells like comfort, like tradition, like something trustworthy. But as you step inside, the story grows more complicated. You stand near the back counter, watching the baker slice open a loaf for a customer. The inside is dazzlingly white, almost unnaturally so. It looks pristine, clean, a perfect contrast to the soot-covered streets outside. And yet, something about it gives you pause. You glance around the shelves. All the bread here seems unusually light, not just in colour but in weight. The crusts break too easily. The crumb is dry, even while fresh. You lift a small roll from the sample tray. It crumbles between your fingers before you can take a bite. The secret lies in what isn't on the label: alum. In Victorian England, bakers often added alum, a compound traditionally used in tanning leather, to make flour appear whiter and improve the texture of low-quality dough. It gave poor flour the appearance of purity. It stiffened the loaf, and most importantly, it fooled the eye. You can almost hear the reasoning in the baker's head. Good flour is expensive. Bleached flour looks luxurious. White bread is what everyone wants. So you stretch the ingredients, make do, add a little something extra. And here's the twist. It wasn't illegal. Not then, not exactly. Food laws were vague. Inspections were rare. As long as the bread didn't immediately make someone ill, it passed. You take a bite of the roll. It tastes fine. A little bland. Dry, perhaps. But it's bread. And that was often enough for a city that needed calories more than flavour. A young clerk beside you buys 3 rolls and asks for them to be split with treacle. It's his lunch, he explains. The dark syrup helps it stick to your ribs, he laughs, rubbing his stomach. You notice he doesn't ask what's in the bread, just smiles and pays. Behind the counter, the baker is already shaping the next batch. He dusts the bench with flour that may or may not be pure. You see the small tin nearby, unlabelled. Just enough alum added to stiffen the dough and stretch a bag of flour an extra dozen loaves. And it's not just this bakery. You've heard the stories now, of powdered bone added to bread, of chalk used to extend flour, of mashed rice folded in to bulk it out. None of it dangerous in small amounts, but none of it honest either. What's most striking is the normality of it all. No one in the shop seems concerned. The loaves are flying off the shelf. People like the way the bread looks. It's neat, uniform, easy to slice. It toasts well. Sandwiches hold together. But the long-term cost? That's harder to see. Digestion grows sluggish. Stomachs ache more often. People blame the damp air, the stress, the factory hours. They rarely blame the loaf on the table. Because how could something so pure-looking be at fault? You step behind the bakery now, not into a sinister dungeon of corruption, but into a space that looks surprisingly ordinary. The workbench is worn smooth from years of use. Sacks of flour lean against the wall, some tied with twine, some half open. A few are labelled clearly, others not at all. Tin canisters sit on a shelf, their contents unknown to the untrained eye. You see the baker again, now rolling dough with mechanical precision. He works fast, there's no time for fuss. One arm moves like a lever, the other dusts the bench just enough to keep things moving. This is not the bread of art or craft, this is bread of necessity. And next to the dough sits a little tin box, no label, just smudged fingerprints on the lid. He opens it, pinches a small amount of pale powder between his fingers and works it into the mix. Alum. He isn't hiding it. He isn't cackling like a villain in a penny dreadful. It's just another ingredient like salt or yeast. One of the tricks of the trade. You recall a parliamentary report from years later that would reveal how widespread the practice had become. Bakers using substances like alum, chalk, or even powdered Derbyshire stone, not to poison, but to preserve their profits and meet rising demand. It wasn't fraud in their eyes, it was adaptation. A delivery boy arrives at the back door to collect 2 baskets of rolls. Hospice order, he mumbles. You glance at the paper, 50 buns, 30 slices, all destined for a small institution down the lane. Charity bread, stretched just a little thinner perhaps, but still warm, still delivered. The baker sighs. Good work, that is, he says, folding his arms. Better than wasting it. You nod. There's something in his voice, resignation perhaps, or quiet pride. He isn't blind to the compromises, but he's feeding dozens of people each day. What matters more, purity or possibility? Outside again, the street is bustling. Shoppers carry loaves under their arms. A mother tears a roll in half and hands it to her daughter as they walk. No one talks about additives or compounds. They talk about prices, about softness, about whether the crust is crisp enough. This is what happens when hunger and appearance collide. People choose what looks good. Bakers provide what sells, and slowly expectations shift. A new sign is being painted over a nearby shop. Pure bread, no additives. A bold claim, likely true, likely expensive, and likely ignored by most passers-by. Because it's not the truth that sells, it's the look, the feel, the price. As you wander further down the road, you spot a discarded crust near the curb, a neat bite mark in the edge. The inside is pale and dry, not mouldy, just abandoned. And in that small, overlooked piece of bread you see it, clearly, how even food can become background noise, something so ordinary it's invisible, something so altered it's no longer questioned. You walk on, past the pastry stalls, past the window displays, past the bakers who shape illusion into nourishment, and somewhere in the city, another batch of alum-laced loaves rises in a warm oven, ready to greet a world that stopped asking what bread is supposed to be. This time you're drawn by smell. Not the fresh scent of bread or the burnt sugar tang of toffee, but something quieter, subtle, yeasty and warm. It leads you to another bakery, one that looks older than the rest, with soot on its windowsills and bricks darkened by years of coal smoke. You push the door open. The little bell jingles. Inside, the light is soft, dimmed by age-stained glass. Wooden shelves curve around the walls, holding loaves in waxed paper, round rolls in cloth-lined baskets, and small brown buns in neat rows. An older man, perhaps the owner, greets you with a nod. He doesn't speak much, but his hands move with calm authority as he arranges pastries and checks the oven. There's something slower about this place, more deliberate. You take in the loaves, darker than what you've seen elsewhere, not bleached, not puffed up with alum. These are denser, heavier, wholemeal, the kind of bread that reminds you of earth and grain, not plaster and polish. You point to a bun and ask what's in it. He shrugs and says, flour, salt, yeast, maybe a little milk if I've got it. He says it like a joke, but you believe him, and that's when he says something you won't forget. People don't want bread anymore. They want bread that looks like cake. It clicks. Victorian junk food didn't start with candy. It began with the idea that food should be a kind of performance. White meant clean, tall meant rich, soft meant fresh. And so the humble loaf had to transform. Dark flour was seen as poor. Dense bread was rustic. What people craved was perfection. Pure white interiors, golden crusts, and feather-light texture. That's why a loom became so popular. It made even the roughest flour look refined. Bakers could cut corners and still sell loaves that looked premium. But alum isn't just a flour brightener, it affects digestion. Too much, over time, could cause stomach irritation, constipation and internal dryness. Nothing dramatic, nothing that sent you to the hospital. Just the kind of discomfort that became so routine, you stopped noticing. You sit down on a wooden bench near the oven and take a bite of the old man's roll. It's hearty, chewy. There's a faint sweetness from the grain. No metallic tang, no chalky aftertaste. It fills you slowly, quietly, like real food does. He watches you, arms folded. Most people pass me by now, he says. They want fluff. I give them heft. He's not bitter, just steady. A craftsman in a city that's forgotten the craft. As you leave the shop, roll in hand, the sky's turning grey. Smoke hangs in the air. You pass another bakery, this one glossier. Gold signage, bright windows, clean uniforms. A queue curls out the door. Inside, the shelves gleam with white loaves, lined like soldiers, identical in size and weight. It's all beautiful, impressive, and hollow. You think back to the quiet baker, kneading real dough behind a dusty window, and you wonder how long his kind will last. You continue down the street with that roll still warm in your coat pocket, and your thoughts still wrapped around what he said. They want bread that looks like cake. The idea lingers as you wander past a new kind of shop, an early fancy grocer, the kind that caters to the emerging middle class. Its windows are sparkling, its shelves are tidy. Inside, a young woman behind the counter is artfully arranging packages of bread wrapped in branded paper. Each loaf looks pristine. Each label boasts words like refined, pure or extra fine. No mention of what's actually in the flour, just the illusion of quality. You watch as a customer steps in, collar neatly pressed, gloves spotless, and orders a loaf without hesitation. She doesn't inspect it, doesn't question the whiteness or the feel. The wrapping is enough. The experience is enough. The bread's job is not to nourish. It's to fit an image. This is the new direction. Food as fashion. And alum-lace bread was right at the centre of it. It allowed bakers and grocers to meet demand without investing in higher quality grain. It kept loaves light, stretched flour supplies, and made even modest bakeries look modern and successful. You pause at a bench and watch carts roll by, some delivering ice, others carrying stacks of boxed loaves to nearby shops. The bread market has become industrial, scaled, repeatable. You recall a pamphlet you saw once arguing that bread should be a uniform product, unaffected by harvest or season. That was the promise. A loaf that never changed, never failed. A loaf as predictable as a clock. But predictability had its cost. Even as early as the 1850s, physicians were quietly observing a pattern. Stomach troubles on the rise, digestion sluggish, bowels inconsistent. But who could prove it was the bread? People blamed stress, or city air, or heredity. The loaf on their plate was too familiar to question, and the idea of returning to darker, heavier bread, that felt like going backwards, a poor man's loaf, a peasant's slice. No, the goal was softness, whiteness, elegance, bread that tore apart like sponge and melted under jam. That made you feel, just for a moment, like life was easier than it really was. You wander back to the quiet street from earlier and notice something curious. The old baker's shop has no queue, but a few neighbours are chatting outside. One of them holds a small basket of rolls. She smiles as she talks. Her hands are flour-dusted. She looks like someone who remembers. And maybe that's the quiet truth here. Not everyone bought into the illusion. Some still valued weight, density, realness. Not because it made them nostalgic, but because it made them full. Because food, at its best, wasn't about status or colour or texture. It was about comfort that stayed with you. As you walk home, the streets blur together, but the taste of that heavy roll stays on your tongue. Simple, honest, imperfect, real, and in a city of hollow loaves and powdered promises that might be the rarest flavour of all. By now, you've learned to look twice at every bite. So when you come across a milk cart parked near a row of terrace houses, you pause, not just to watch, but to observe. The cart is wooden, painted pale blue, and hitched to a sleepy-eyed horse. Metal canisters gleam faintly in the morning light, each with a dent or two from years of travel. A lad with sleeves rolled up is ladling milk into pitchers for the queue of women and children. Seems simple enough. Milk, pure and familiar. Surely that's safe. But as you linger, you notice something odd. The milk isn't cold, nor is it warm. It's tepid, somewhere in between. There's no sign of ice, no cooling cloths, no rush to keep it chilled. And when the boy hands over a pitcher, the liquid moves just a little too thinly. Not creamy, not rich, just watery. You recall something someone once said in a crowded market. There's more river than cow in that milk. At the time, it made you laugh. Now, it lands differently. Milk in the Victorian city was one of the most quietly manipulated products on the market. It was easy to tamper with and hard to verify. Watering it down became routine. A little chalk helped keep it white. A touch of starch thickened it back up. If it turned sour too quickly, no matter. A bit of borax or baking soda would refresh it again. No one could trace the journey from cow to cup. Milk often travelled miles from country farms, jolting over bumpy roads, sitting in uncovered cans, absorbing heat, dust, and fumes. By the time it reached the city, it had aged fast, and the vendors had learned to give it a facelift. You watch a woman lift her pitcher to the light. She frowns, then shrugs. It's probably good enough for tea, and that's what it came down to. Good enough. If it didn't smell sour, if it didn't curdle immediately, it passed. But you also know that certain stomach troubles, nagging ones, lingering ones, often started in the teacup, not the tavern. You edge closer and see the boy rinsing out a canister with water from a bucket. The rag he uses has seen better days. He hums softly, oblivious to the fact that his casual wipe is undoing the illusion of cleanliness. The milk will still taste fine. The children will still drink it. But a question lingers. How much of this is nourishment? And how much is theatre? You remember reading that some early analysts found traces of lead in urban milk. Not because it was added, but because the cans had poorly soldered seams, and over time, the milk absorbed what it touched. Other reports mention lime from the washing buckets, or tin from the ladles, or even copper residue. But testing was rare, standards were looser, and most people had no way of knowing. You bought milk the same way you bought trust, from the same face, on the same corner, every morning. And still, People carried on, because a cup of tea needed milk, because porridge without cream felt poor, because children expected a warm mug before school, and so, even as the milk grew thinner, paler and more mysterious, it never stopped being part of daily life. You follow the milk cart as it rolls on toward its next stop, another narrow street with rows of tidy houses, flower pots in windows, and chimneys just starting to puff out the morning's first smoke. The cart halts again, and a new line forms. Different faces, same routine. You stand near the back, just watching now. The boy dips his ladle, paws, nods, moves on. One woman hands him a farthing and whispers something about extra thick today. He winks and nudges a different canister forward, its lid worn smooth, the spout slightly shinier from use. Curious, you step closer and glance into that canister. The milk here is thicker, creamier looking, richer in hue. But something's off. It's too uniform, too perfect. You suspect what's been added. In some parts of the city, milkmen had been known to blend in ground sugar, arrowroot, or gelatin, not for taste but for appearance. A slightly thickened texture made it seem fresher, more luxurious, especially in wealthier neighbourhoods. Sometimes they used a bit of animal fat, melted and skimmed across the top to mimic cream. It wasn't toxic, it wasn't scandalous, it was subtle, deceptive only in the way it played to the eye, not the gut. But if you drank it every day, and most did, it accumulated. Not harm necessarily, but influence. Your palate adjusted, your expectations shifted. You started to believe milk should look like this, taste like this. And the real thing, fresh from a cow, that started to seem too rustic. You remember a detail from one inspector's notes, a rare visit to a farm outside the city. There the milk was kept cool with damp cloths, poured into clean ceramic jugs, and sold before noon. "Tastes grassy," one city dweller remarked during a test. Bit odd. Because real food began to feel foreign. You glance across the street and see a boy drinking straight from a tin mug, milk dribbling down his chin. He wipes it away, makes a face, and tosses the rest behind a gate. Maybe it had sat in the sun too long. Maybe the mixture curdled just slightly. Maybe that mug had yesterday's remnants still clinging to the inside. It happens. And yet, milk remained a cornerstone of the Victorian kitchen. Used in tea, custard, sauces, stews, it was hard to avoid. For many families, it was one of the only sources of fat and calcium in their daily diet. No one could afford to give it up, so vendors did what they could, extended its life, balanced the flavour, covered the changes with a little chalk here, a dash of soda there. All quiet tricks, nothing dramatic. By now, a soft drizzle has started to fall. The cart driver pulls a tarp across the canisters. You watch the droplets bead and roll down the oilskin. People keep queuing. No one seems to mind the rain. They just pull scarves tighter, nod to the boy, and head home with their little metal pitchers swinging gently at their sides. You don't follow this time. You stay a moment longer, listening to the soft splash of hoof steps and the clink of ladles against tin. Milk was supposed to be simple, but in this city, even simplicity had layers. It's later that same day when a new sound draws your attention, a slow bell ringing, accompanied by a sing-song voice calling out into the alleyways. "Ice cream! Fresh today." The voice is light, practiced, familiar. You follow it instinctively, weaving through the crowd until you find the source. A small handcart pushed by a man in a checkered apron and bowler hat rattles along the cobbles. Inside the cart, a tin basin set deep into a wooden frame, packed around with straw and dripping with melting ice. Atop the basin sits a metal tub covered with cloth. The man lifts the cloth just enough to reveal the pale, slightly shimmering surface of ice cream. He smiles and nods. vanilla, or lemon if you like a bit of zest. It's tempting, a penny per scoop. You pay and watch him scoop from the edge, thin, crisp, and firm. He wraps it in a scrap of wax paper, folds it into a cone and hands it over. It's cold, creamy, and just a little sour. Not unpleasant, just unexpected. You take a second bite. That's when you notice it, an almost musty flavour underneath the sweetness. The texture is off, grainier than it should be, and wet at the edges. You don't stop chewing. No one ever does. But something tells you this wasn't made in anyone's kitchen. And you'd be right. In Victorian cities, ice cream wasn't always what it seemed. It was rarely made with real cream. More often, it was a mixture of milk, sometimes fresh, sometimes not, sugar, starch, and flavouring, frozen quickly in a hand-cranked tub surrounded by melting ice. The ice itself, frequently gathered from rivers, lakes, or even stored from winter months under sawdust in underground pits. Cleanliness was more an aspiration than a guarantee, and while some vendors were careful, boiling the milk, sanitizing the tubs, others simply poured and froze. If the result held its shape and tasted sweet, it sold. A writer once described ice cream vendors as creatures of convenience, men who operated with speed and confidence, not recipes. Their tools were simple, their ingredients were whatever was at hand. One common shortcut, using arrowroot or flour to thicken the base. Another, adding saccharin or treacle instead of real sugar. It saved costs and masked any odd aftertastes. You lean against a nearby post and look around. A small group of children have gathered by the cart. Their faces light up as the vendor scoops dollops onto slivers of stale bun, forming makeshift sandwiches. A clever way to stretch the serving. They laugh as it drips down their fingers. And still, you can't help but wonder, what's really in the tub? The answer might be, nothing terrible, but also nothing you'd expect. There might be a hint of margarine, or beef fat, or old milk revived with baking soda. There might be traces of saltpeter used to hold the temperature longer. If the vendor was especially daring, even soap shavings have been known to find their way into the mix to create that rich, foamy texture. And yet, the treat holds power. Ice cream was novelty, luxury, cold food in a hot, smoky city. It brought joy, even if the sauce was a little suspect. You take a final bite, noticing now how quickly it's melting into the paper. The texture is changing. The warmth of your fingers is unravelling it. Fast food in the truest sense, and you realise you've eaten it all anyway. As the ice cream cart rattles away, its bell fading into the maze of brick alleys and iron fences, you linger a little longer. A drizzle begins, soft, barely enough to dampen your collar, but it's enough to clear the street of most passers-by. Still, a few loyal customers remain, huddled under awnings, clutching their cones like tiny trophies of defiance. You toss the crumpled paper into a nearby bin and keep walking, your fingers sticky and your thoughts still tasting of vanilla that wasn't really vanilla. Around the next corner you find another frozen treat, a shallow tin chest nestled into the window of a sweet shop. Inside, little blocks of ices, rosewater, lemon, even pistachio, though it's unlikely they've ever seen a real nut, rest on trays of packed snow. They look elegant, brightened with food colouring and glistening under a pane of glass. But you know now how quickly that sheen fades once it touches warm hands. The shopkeeper inside is fanning herself with a newspaper. She glances up at you with a practised smile, one hand still resting on the scoop beside her. You ask her how long the ice has lasted today. Long enough, she replies. Long enough to sell it before it puddles. That's the quiet rule of Victorian ices. Serve it before it surrenders. If it holds shape, it's fine. If it sags, sell it faster. Waste nothing. Time is the real enemy, and time in this city doesn't forgive food that needs special treatment. Without mechanical refrigeration, most ice cream was a balancing act. Stored in straw-packed barrels or chipped off great blocks harvested months ago, it had to be protected constantly from heat, movement, and delay. Some vendors managed beautifully, others merely survived. And what happened after the sale? That wasn't their concern. You once read that certain ices, particularly the cheaper ones, were flavoured with ester compounds, synthetic imitations of fruit or flower scents. Pear, banana, almond, even pineapple. They could be made from alcohols and acids blended together, sometimes in backroom apothecaries or kitchens shared with other trades. The result was intensely aromatic and convincingly sweet, but not quite natural. Still it sold. Even Queen Victoria herself was known to enjoy ices at formal banquets, though hers likely bore no resemblance to the block you just nibbled on. The royal version was made with real cream, imported fruits, and snow gathered by servants from distant hills. Yours was likely blended in the back of a shop, frozen with lake ice, and flavoured with oil of lemon or artificial rose water, fragrant, fleeting, and just cold enough to impress. You smile at the thought, two worlds, connected by a shared craving for sweetness on the tongue. The rain picks up slightly. The awning overhead drips in a steady rhythm. You step back into the street, passing another vendor now covering his cart with oilcloth, the remaining ices melting silently beneath. No one looks disappointed. It's part of the ritual. Catch it while you can. Eat it before it runs. And as the last drops of your ice cream memory vanish from your fingertips, you realise something simple. The charm was never just in the taste. It was in the chase. A race against the sun, against time, against spoilage. The delight of a cold treat offered briefly vanishing completely. You lick your fingers one last time and keep walking. It's late afternoon now, and the city's rhythm has shifted. The markets are quieter, the delivery's slowing, but you're still on the hunt. Curious, watchful, following the next scent. This time, it's savoury. You round a corner into a less polished part of town, where the cobbles are uneven and the shop signs hang at slight angles. A narrow doorway with a swinging wood sign reads, "Fine meats and sausage," though the word "fine" may be working overtime. Inside, the shop is dim, lit by a single hanging gas lamp. The air smells of spice and something older, meaty but not fresh. Behind the counter, a butcher in a stained apron wipes his hands on a cloth and gives you a nod that's more habit than welcome. Hanging in the glass cabinet are thick sausages, coils of them. Some are reddish-brown and plump, others pale and oddly speckled. You tap the glass and ask, "What's in these?" The butcher shrugs. "Beef in that one, pork in the other. Mostly." Victorian sausages, particularly those sold in poorer districts, were famously flexible in their ingredients. A little meat, certainly, but also rusk, breadcrumbs, suet, and sometimes what was politely called offcuts, cartilage, gristle, even connective tissue ground so fine you'd never notice. And if the meat wasn't quite fresh, no need to toss it. A touch of salt, a pinch of pepper, a splash of vinegar, and if needed a bit of red colouring, cochineal or even iron oxide to restore that healthy hue. Tie the casing, twist it neat, and onto the tray it goes. You look closer. One of the sausages glistens unnaturally. It's not sweat from the casing, it's something else. A thin coat of fat or oil brushed on to catch the light. It gives the appearance of moisture, freshness, as if it were just made this morning. The truth, it could have been made days ago, or longer, preserved, repackaged, and rotated. You recall one inspector's remark from years later, that some sausages contained more imagination than meat, and yet they were beloved. Filling, salty, and easy to cook. Toss one into a pan with onions and tea and you had dinner. There's a plate of meat pies on the counter, each about the size of your palm. Crimped edges, golden crust, steam still curling up from a cracked lid. But the filling could be anything. Often a blend of low-cost cuts, minced finely and padded with seasoned flour or potato mash. You buy one, because of course you do, because it smells good, and because, like everyone else, you want something warm and solid in your hands. It tastes fine, savoury, peppery, a little soft. You try not to think too hard about what you're chewing. The texture is even. The spices do their job, and the crust, buttery and crisp. It's easy to understand why these sold by the hundreds on factory lunch breaks. You step back outside, still chewing, as the butcher returns to trimming another cut at the block. A tin pail sits beside him, filled with trimmings. He glances at it, then pours it into a basin behind the counter. Waste not. In the distance, another meat cart arrives to restock for evening trade. The driver lifts covered trays down onto the curb. It's impossible to say what's inside. Chops, maybe. Or more sausage. It doesn't matter, as long as it's seasoned right. You continue your walk through the streets, now trailing the scent of cooked meat and wood smoke. The savoury air is comforting in a way that overrides hesitation. After all, even with all the unknowns behind the butcher's curtain, the city still runs on these foods. They're everywhere. They work. You pass a group of boys sitting on the steps of a corner shop, sharing a sausage roll between them. The crust is crumbling. The filling is almost indistinguishable. Dark, soft and peppery. One boy takes a bite and passes it along. None of them ask what's inside. They don't need to. It tastes familiar, salty, warm. That's enough. Victorian sausages were never just about meat. They were about thrift, texture and availability. Butchers learned early that as long as the product looked good and held together, the rest was negotiable. Ground oats, beef blood, suet and bread could all be mixed into a convincing shape. If it sizzled in a pan and didn't smell sour, it sold. One particularly common trick was to use preserved trimmings, bits of older meat kept cold or soaked in brine until needed. A bit of spice masked any musty note, and colour easily fixed. A few drops of meat dye gave even the most tired cut a fresh reddish blush. As you pass another shop, you catch sight of a large ham hanging in the window, glistening and perfectly pink, almost too pink. You remember a detail you once read. Some hams were treated with saltpetre to preserve their colour and prevent greying. It worked well. It also gave the meat that signature rosy hue, even after months of storage. You pause at a grocer's stall now, this one offering sliced cold meats and small pies wrapped in muslin. The man behind the counter offers you a sliver of tongue, lightly smoked, paper thin, and just barely salted. It's better than expected. Rich, with a metallic tang that lingers. He taps the jar beside him. Pickling brine, he says, keeps everything tight. And he's right. Pickling was the backbone of preservation in a world without reliable refrigeration. Tongue, beef, lamb, pork. They were brined in large barrels, sometimes for days, sometimes weeks. It kept them from spoiling, but also made the texture more forgiving. It allowed even lower quality cuts to become palatable. You take another bite, then another. It's easy to forget the questions once the flavours settle in. And that perhaps was the true brilliance of Victorian meat handling. Plausible comfort. With enough salt, enough vinegar, enough spice, any cut could become a delicacy. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a performance. And each bite masked 100 decisions behind the counter. Butchers, grocers, pie sellers, they weren't villains, they were improvisers, artists of economy. Their trade relied on instincts. How far could a cut be stretched? How old was too old? Which seasoning saved the day? Back on the street, the air is cooling. Gas lamps flicker on one by one and smoke drifts gently from chimneys. You unwrap the last bite of your pie and savour it slowly. Whatever it was enough. Evening sets in gently, casting the rooftops in a warm, flickering amber. You walk now not as a customer, but as a quiet observer, retracing the path of what you've tasted, the powdered sugar candies, the alum bread, the whisper-thin milk, the glistening sausages. At first they seem like separate quirks of a bustling city, but slowly a larger picture begins to emerge. Victorian junk food wasn't just an accident of poor regulation or clever shopkeeping. It was designed to suit a new kind of world, one that moved faster, worked longer, and expected more from less. You find yourself in a busier district now, closer to the factories, where men and women pour out of tall brick buildings with iron frames and smoking stacks. Their pace is brisk. No one lingers. You follow them down the street to a cluster of food vendors who've just begun setting up their carts. Boiled puddings wrapped in cloth, tea cakes sold by the slice, meat paste sandwiches wrapped in newspaper. It's a miniature economy of convenience, and it's running like clockwork. You step beside a man sipping from a chipped mug. He offers you a grin and a piece of his currant loaf. You take it with a polite nod. It's dry, sweet, a little crumbly. He chews quickly, eyes darting to the clock tower. Just a few minutes before the next bell. That's when it clicks. This food, the sweets, the biscuits, the cheap pies, it wasn't just tolerated, it was essential. It fit into time. In a city where breaks were short and meals were mobile, the food had to cooperate. No room for roasts or stews, no cutlery, no sitting, no long chewing. Just calories in neat packages. A bun in one hand, a mug in the other, and back to work before the whistle blew. And so the very structure of the working day created the perfect environment for processed, padded, flavoured, dyed, and diluted food to thrive. It was portable, it was predictable, it was in its own way brilliant. You move toward a cart selling energy drops. They're small, hard, and brightly coloured. The vendor claims they keep the mind clear. You know better than to ask what's in them, but you also know why people come back for more. A woman next to you buys a half-dozen buns and tucks them into a cloth bag. You ask if they're for dinner. For the train, she says, and the boys, better than nothing. Better than nothing. It's a phrase you've heard more than once now. It's not an insult. It's an understanding. A quiet agreement between buyer and seller, city and citizen. No one expects perfection. Just something that fills the gap. You think back to what food meant before this era. How meals were once places of pause, conversation, reflection. But in this new world, meals have become motion. They've been distilled into quick, chewable moments scattered between hours of labour. And the system? It loves this. Because people who eat quickly work quickly. People who don't stop to cook don't stop at all. The city moves forward, the factory hums, the clock hands turn, and somewhere beneath it all, a boiled sweet melts quietly on the tongue. The crowd around you begins to thin as the last bell rings, and workers disappear into pubs, boarding houses, or long walks home. You pause at the edge of the square and notice something else. How neatly all of this food fits into the rhythm of an empire. Britain, after all, wasn't just expanding overseas, it was expanding its appetite. Ships brought sugar from the Caribbean, tea from India, spices from Ceylon, tinned meats from Australia. A global pantry flowed through the ports of London, Liverpool and Bristol. But by the time it reached the average Londoner's hand, it had been stretched, cut, flavoured, and transformed into something that fit the local pace and the local pocket. You glance at a tin of jam in a shop window. The label shows strawberries, but the ingredient list is short on fruit. In fact, there's a growing art of fruitless jam, made with beet syrup, pectin, colorants, and just a whisper of real berry. Sometimes turnip or apple pulp, dyed red and thickened with gum arabic, stands in convincingly. It spreads like jam. It smells like jam. For most, that's enough. You stop into a general store, watching as clerks pack orders, condensed milk tins with foreign stamps, blocks of cocoa substitute wrapped in wax paper, tea bricks from halfway around the world. But these aren't delicacies. They're basics, daily staples, inexpensive, concentrated, long-lasting, perfect for a workforce with no time, little storage, and tight budgets. Even the tea, once a symbol of elegance, has become part of the factory lunch. Strong, dark, sometimes astringent, steeped quickly and served with chalk-thinned milk and a few spoonfuls of coarse sugar. Food has become an engine, one bite at a time, and behind that engine a quietly brilliant system. Not malicious, just efficient. Colonial imports allowed for cheap sweetness. Local additives stretch that sweetness further. Flavourings replace perishables. Colorants masked age. And every step in the process, each little compromise, added up to something fast, shelf-stable, and satisfying enough. You wander past a bookshop and notice a pamphlet in the window, titled The Chemistry of Daily Food. Its pages, if you flip through them, would list the compounds behind your breakfast and the pigments in your supper. There are no protests, no boycotts. Just the quiet curiosity of a few thinkers writing to those who might listen. Most people aren't listening, they're living. In the boarding houses, dinners are simple. A slice of white bread, a sliver of cheese, maybe a boiled pudding or a shared sausage roll. You walk by a tenement window and see a table set for 3. Nothing extravagant, just a plate of pickled eggs, a jug of thin tea, and a pot of mustard. One child stirs treacle into cold porridge. The room smells faintly of vinegar and salt. And in all of this, the sugars, the dyes, the starches, there's something else too. A resilience. A city finding its way to feed millions without enough time, enough money, or enough fuel. Was it perfect? No, but it worked. And as the sky darkens fully, and the gas lamps burn steady against the fog, you realise that Victorian junk food wasn't just a quirk of the age. It was the taste of progress. Fast, cheap, and just believable enough. By now, your senses have sharpened. You notice things more quickly. Colours too vivid, textures too smooth, smells just slightly off. So when you step into a narrow lane that branches behind the factories, and the scent of warm gruel and sweet starch wafts toward you, you follow it without hesitation. It leads to a small canteen, not a restaurant exactly, just a shared kitchen run out of a converted storeroom, with benches arranged beneath rows of wooden beams and walls blackened from years of smoke. There's no sign out front, just the sound of ladles clinking against pots. Inside, it's bustling. Tired workers crowd the tables, their plates filled with simple, familiar fare. Thick slices of sweetened bread, ladles of gruel, penny pudding slices and mugs of milky tea. Some talk softly, others eat in silence, heads low, eyes half-lidded with fatigue. The food here is humble, but not unpleasant. It's designed to fill space. Warm starch, soft textures, mild flavours, nothing spicy, nothing sharp. Just energy for the road ahead or the workday behind. You take a seat and observe the steaming bowls being dished out. Gruel thickened with flour and sweetened with syrup. Bread topped with what looks like plum jam, though it likely contains more apple or beet than plum. The pudding, brown and dense, smells of treacle, clove and nutmeg, but you suspect there's hardly any real spice, just molasses and imagination. Still, it's hearty. It sticks to the ribs. You ask the cook, a cheerful woman in a flour-dusted apron, how long she's been serving this fare. 20 years near enough, she says. Started when the laundry across the street opened. Had to feed the girls something they could eat fast. And that's just it. This isn't food for pleasure. It's food for continuity. Calories over flavour. Warmth over variety. Fill the belly, soothe the nerves, move along. You glance into the kitchen behind her and spot tubs of flour marked bulk blend, tins of treacle, and jugs of diluted milk. On a high shelf, a small tin of cocoa powder substitute. Everything built to stretch, built to serve many, built to keep moving. There's no shame in it. If anything, there's a kind of quiet pride. These dishes aren't lavish, but they're steady, predictable. When you only have 15 minutes to rest, there's comfort in knowing the pudding will be the same as yesterday and tomorrow. At the next table, 2 workers are trading bites from each other's plates. Yours got more jam, one says. The other grins and replies, "You're just jealous I got the purple end." You smile. Even here, even now, sweetness has become something you chase. You don't expect fruit. You don't demand purity. But if your spoon finds that one corner with the most syrup, it feels like a win. That's what junk food gave the city. Not just flavour or speed, but little victories, familiarity, repetition, the illusion of variety through presentation and colour, and the chance to taste something indulgent, even if it wasn't. You scrape the last bit of pudding from the dish and look around. Plates are being cleared, tea refilled, boots stamped against the cold stone floor. Then, one by one, the room begins to empty again. Back to work. Back to life. Back to the rhythm that never quite stops. You linger for a moment longer in the canteen as the bench is empty. The light has changed. The golden hue of gas lamps now casts soft halos on every surface, catching in the steam that still rises gently from abandoned mugs of tea. There's a strange peace here, in this in-between moment, when one wave of people has gone and the next hasn't yet arrived. The cook hums softly as she scrapes out the pudding tin. What remains is stuck in the corners, burnished, sticky, familiar. You ask her how long a batch like that lasts. "Depends," she says. "Some days it's gone before lunch. Other times I've got to dress it up a little to move it." She gestures toward a small bottle beside the stove. Bit of colouring in the syrup helps, makes it look newer. You nod. By now, you've heard that story more than once. If it looks right, it sells. You walk back out into the lane, past the soft glow of windows toward another building with the faint scent of hot sugar wafting through the cracks. A sweetworks factory. Just one of dozens tucked throughout the city. And in there, sugar isn't just sold, it's sculpted. The door is cracked open, and with a glance inside you spot trays of glossy sweets being cooled on metal tables. Boiled candies, barley twists, and long sticks of peppermint are poured, stretched, cut. The men working the sugar wear thick gloves and aprons. It's more chemistry than cooking. You recognise some of the colours. Vivid green, cherry red, sapphire blue. Each batch is portioned and packaged, some destined for sweet shops, others for carts, some perhaps headed straight to canteens like the one you just left. But not all the ingredients are sugar. Molasses is used in the place of honey. Starch replaces fruit pulp. Treacle gives the illusion of richness. And where real flavours fall short, there's always essence. Banana, lemon, almond, all sold by the bottle, often manufactured from coal tar or wood pulp derivatives. The result? Food that whispers of fruit and luxury, but only whispers. You remember hearing once that some sweets were coated in mineral powder to keep them from sticking in damp weather, and that peppermint drops were sometimes laced with just a touch of powdered alum, giving them their signature snap and sparkle. Inside the factory, a man tosses a handful of green sweets into a jar and seals it with wax paper. The label reads, "Herbal pastilles for the voice." You know they're really just sugar, starch and eucalyptus essence. But the promise on the label for the voice gives it an air of purpose, and that's the quiet genius of this era. The line between food and function, between nourishment and novelty, becomes blurred. You walk a bit farther, past a shop selling biscuits in tins stamped with names like Victory Mix and Empire Digestives. The packaging is bold. The contents? Simple. Flour, sugar, baking soda, and a touch of lard or margarine. Durable, dry, dependable. Sweet enough to be a treat. Stable enough to be rationed. You pass one last window before the fog settles in. A bakery display, this time with sugared buns so identical they might have been poured from a mould. You wonder how many hands touched them, how many hours they sat in warm trays, how much of them is sweet memory, and how much is soft illusion. Then you hear a whistle echo down the block. The factory's call again, and in pockets and pails, on napkins and trays, thousands of small, sweet, slightly artificial comforts head back inside. The next morning you find yourself drifting not toward food, but toward its aftermath. You're standing at the corner of a quiet apothecary shop, its large front windows slightly fogged from the inside. The display isn't flashy. No tins of biscuits or sugar-glazed buns here. Just shelves of brown bottles stacked with labels in elegant script. Tonic, powder, lozenge, drops. This is where people come after the sweets wear off. You step inside. A little bell jingles overhead. The air smells faintly of menthol, vinegar and old wood. It's cooler here. Quieter. The floors creak in a way that makes everything feel slower, more deliberate. The pharmacist behind the counter is tall, well-groomed, and clearly used to being listened to. He speaks softly, but with confidence. As you browse, he assists a woman asking for something gentle for the stomach. He recommends a chalk powder. Another customer arrives complaining of sluggish digestion. He's handed a dark liquid, bitter, herbal, and best taken before tea. A third asks for something to clear the pipes. The apothecary offers drops of peppermint essence in warm water. What you notice most is that none of these complaints are dramatic. No emergencies, just discomfort, constipation, heartburn, that peculiar tiredness that settles in the stomach after meals. You recognise the pattern now. Food that fills but does not nourish. Meals that look fine but leave something behind. You ask the pharmacist what people come in for most. He smiles politely. Stomach remedies. Always. It's the bread, and the pickles, and the sweets, of course. He says it without judgment. People chew too fast, or too much, or too sweet. So they come here for balance. You glance at a jar of magnesia powder, used for heartburn and bloating. It's been popular for decades, not because of indulgence, but because of routine. Eating the same white loaf every day, swallowing too much starch, washing it down with sweet tea. Somewhere in the middle, the body forgets what it's meant to do. You lift a box of rhubarb tablets, gentle laxatives made from dried rhubarb root, still sold today in fact. Back then they were marketed as restoratives. Not too strong, just enough to keep the system moving. It's easy to imagine a person's entire week following a cycle. Heavy bread, sticky sweets, tea with treacle, followed by a chalk powder to calm the belly, and rhubarb tablets by the weekend. It becomes its own rhythm, and medicine, just like the food, adapts. Apothecaries begin stocking what sells. Peppermint lozenges for queasiness, ginger tonics for bloating, fennel mixtures for gas. Some even prepare their own digestive wines, fortified mixtures of herbs and sugar that soothe the stomach while taking the edge off a hard day. You ask about the lozenges in the jar on the counter. Licorice and charcoal, he says. A bit bitter, but they help settle things. You take one. It's not pleasant, but you understand the appeal, and just like that, the pieces start to align. Junk food and folk remedies, sweets and stomach powders, barley sugar and bicarb. It's not a war between health and harm, it's a partnership. One product leads to another. One craving becomes a customer. And quietly the system continues. A woman leaves the shop with a paper packet tucked under her arm. You step outside behind her, back into the warming sun. The street is waking up. Carts are rolling. Bakers are already selling buns by the dozen. And somewhere in a pocket, chalk powder waits patiently to smooth out the next indulgence. You stroll a little farther down the street, letting the sounds of the city rise and fall around you. Footsteps on wet stone, a distant whistle, the familiar rattle of a vendor's cart. But your eyes are drawn again to the shops that don't serve food, yet orbit it like moons. The herbalist, the corner chemist, the shop that sells nothing but powders in little folded packets. These are the silent companions to every pastry, every bun, every bright pink sweet. You pass another chemist's window, this one slightly more modern, with decorative jars and glass front drawers. A chalkboard outside lists today's specials: iron tonic, soothing syrup, essence of peppermint, bicarbonate of soda. Inside it smells sharper, like linseed oil and menthol. Two women sit on the bench near the wall, each with a small brown parcel wrapped in string. The clerk is explaining a new powder for those troubled by digestion after white bread. You smile to yourself. You've heard that before, and the pattern becomes clearer. This isn't just medicine after the fact. This is medicine woven into the Victorian diet. Just as people bought sugar by the ounce, they bought powders to recover from sugar. Just as they accepted chalk in their milk, they turned to chalk tablets to settle their milk-heavy stomachs. You glance toward a shelf of amber bottles, some are lined with laudanum, others with camphor, clove oil or pennyroyal syrup. While some are strong, most are mild, soothing, familiar. The kind of things a household would keep in a tin beside the tea. The clerk offers you a sample of digestive pastilles. They're dark, minty, with a slight sting of anise. You take one. It numbs your tongue slightly, but leaves behind a sweet, smoky aftertaste. Not bad. Most people take one after meals, she says, especially after the market's cakes. You think back to the rows of colourful sweets, the toffees wrapped in wax paper, the jam tarts lined up like little jewels. Each one had its shadow waiting here, in the form of a powder, a drop, or a gentle lozenge. And it wasn't just for relief. There was comfort in the cycle. Victorian life didn't demand perfect health. It demanded function. So if your stomach ached after lunch, you didn't complain. You took something. If your appetite faltered after weeks of thin milk and dense buns, you stirred up an iron tonic and moved along. One inspector's notes from the 1870s mention that the most common prescription in certain neighbourhoods was simply restorative mixture, a vague blend of herbs and sugar syrup meant to correct the excesses of daily food. It was taken seriously, but also quietly. Outside again, you spot a boy carrying home a loaf in one hand and a small wrapped package from the chemist in the other. Likely a bit of peppermint powder, or chalk, or something to help his father sleep after supper. And somehow, it all feels balanced. A system, imperfect, but complete. Junk food gave people joy. Medicine gave them permission to enjoy it again tomorrow. The city didn't treat them as two different worlds. They were a pair, a rhythm, a partnership. You glance back at the chemist's window as the light fades behind the glass. A sweet for the tongue, a powder for the gut, and life goes on. It's the next morning when you spot something different. Down a quieter street, Not far from the market square, but tucked behind a row of bookbinders and bootmakers, you find a modest little storefront with a freshly painted sign. Chemical food testing. Inquiries. Welcome. You pause. It doesn't look like much. A single display window, a table stacked with folded pamphlets, and a glass case filled not with food, but with samples. A peppermint sweet split in half, a slice of white bread in a bell jar, a jar of jam that looks more like gel than fruit. Each one labelled not by name, but by what it's been tested for. Alum, lead, chalk, iron oxide, copper sulfate. You step inside. The room smells faintly of vinegar and paper. Behind the counter stands a man with rounded spectacles and ink on his cuffs. He doesn't look like a grocer or a doctor. He looks like someone who asks too many questions and writes everything down. Curious, he asks, with a faint smile of someone who knows that most visitors arrive with doubt and leave with concern. You nod. This, he says, waving toward the bell jar with the bread, was tested last week. 6 different bakers, everyone with alum, 3 with powdered chalk, 1 with a touch of ground rice flour to keep it dry. He doesn't sound angry, just tired. The story of food testing in Victorian England isn't dramatic or glamorous. It's quiet. A long fight fought by men in back rooms and dusty labs, holding up slices of toffee with tweezers and dripping chemical solutions onto jam to see if the red runs too red. They weren't radicals. Many were pharmacists, clerks, or retired chemists. Just people who noticed things didn't taste quite right, and wanted to know why. The man behind the counter shows you a binder, pages filled with handwritten entries. Peppermint lozenges, iron filings detected, sparks visible when bitten. Milk from vendor on Candler Street, 35% water, slightly alkaline, chalk likely. Raspberry tart, cochineal or red lead, further testing required. You glance up at a small poster on the wall. How to detect chalk in your flour. It reads like a recipe. A teaspoon of vinegar, a pinch of flour. If it fizzes, beware. Simple tools, but revolutionary thinking. These food detectives, as they'd later be called, weren't trying to shut down the system. They were trying to understand it, to shine a soft light on what most had accepted in the dark. You're shown a sample of barley sugar that looks perfectly normal, golden, smooth, enticing. But with a drop of reagent, the syrup clouds instantly, turning pale and chalky. The man shakes his head. Beautiful to look at, he says, and full of brick dust. You ask how people respond. Some listen, he shrugs. Others say they'd rather not know, not if it spoils the taste. And isn't that the tension at the heart of it all? Truth versus comfort. There's a growing awareness now. Newspapers are beginning to print lists of suspicious vendors. Public lectures are being held in small town halls. A few mothers have begun bringing their own vinegar to market stalls, doing tests quietly before buying jam or mustard. The movement is small, but real. You leave the shop not frightened, but aware. And somehow, that feels like power. You step back out onto the pavement, blinking into the late morning light, still thinking about the jars and vials and labels behind that chemist's glass. It was quiet work in there, no headlines, no dramatic exposés, just a methodical peeling back of layers. But for the first time, it felt like someone was looking into the food, not just at it. You wander through the market again, seeing everything differently now. The peppermint drops sparkle a bit too much. The loaves of bread seem suspiciously white. Even the raspberry jam displayed in the sunlit window of a fancy grocer's shop looks more like lacquer than fruit. And it hits you. Once you've seen the seams, it's hard to unsee them. Just ahead, you spot another pamphlet stand, this one propped outside a public hall. A folded sheet flutters in the breeze. Its title reads, "Is Your Daily Food Deceiving You?" You pick it up. It's written in plain English, just a single page, printed cheaply but clearly. It outlines common adulterants, chalk, alum, red lead, and suggests how to test for them at home using vinegar, heat, or ink. One section advises, if a sweet smells like varnish, it likely contains essence of pear drops. If your tea leaves stain your fingers black, they may have been used already. It's not fear-mongering, it's guidance, empowerment, an invitation to notice. You tuck it into your coat pocket and look around. A few others have picked one up too. You make eye contact with a man across the street holding the same leaflet. He nods once, not with panic but with recognition. And slowly you realise this isn't just a handful of curious chemists anymore. It's becoming something larger. At a nearby bakery, a small chalkboard sign reads, "No alum used in our flour." 3 months ago that might have seemed strange. Now it feels like a promise. You duck inside. The shelves are modest. Brown loaves, oat cakes, treacle scones. But everything smells warm and earthy. A woman behind the counter greets you and nods toward the sign. "We lost a few customers at first," she says. "They like the white stuff, but more come back now. Said they'd rather chew than worry." Her hands are dusted with flour. Her apron's clean, but clearly worked in. You buy a small rye roll and take a bite. It's dense, nutty, chewy in that slow, satisfying way. It doesn't crumble. It doesn't melt. It resists you, just a little, and in doing so reminds you that it's real. You think again of the food testing shop, of the chemists with their vinegar bottles, of the pamphlets fluttering in windows. It's not a revolution, not yet, but it's a shift. And while the vast machine of adulterated food still hums along, fueled by convenience, by illusion, by habit, it's now being watched, questioned, not torn down, but carefully, persistently examined. One sweet, one slice, one test at a time. You walk on, roll in hand, past the shops and stalls and sweet sellers. The signs haven't changed. The colours still sparkle. The vendors still smile. But now some people squint. Some people sniff twice. Some people ask questions. And in a city that once prized illusion above all else, that might just be the most remarkable flavour of all. There's a livelier energy in the streets today. The market is humming as always, but there's something sharper in the air. More talk, more glances exchanged between shoppers. You hear the word chalk, in passing more than once. A group of women stand near a fruit stall comparing notes, not about prices but about ingredients. You lean in and catch the tail end of a sentence, and the barley sugar turned my spoon black. Something's shifting. You pass a row of shop fronts, and one in particular catches your eye, not because of what it's selling, but because of what it's not. Its shelves are almost bare. A small sign in the window reads, "Closed until fresh stock, no substitutes sold." Next door, a rival grocer has the opposite approach. His displays are bursting with breads, jams and sweets, all priced temptingly low. A mother and child pause in front of the window. The mother hesitates, then moves on. You follow. The quiet battle between honest food and clever fakery has begun to reach the open air. It's no longer whispered in the back rooms of chemists or scribbled in inspectors' notes. It's out here, where anyone with eyes, a nose, or a slightly uneasy stomach can take part. But that also means competition is heating up. You duck into a small grocer's shop that smells strongly of treacle and flour. The owner is cheerful, wiping his hands on his apron as he arranges tins of condensed milk. "You're in luck," he says. "Got a shipment of barley flour in. Real stuff too." You ask what's in the fruit drops beside the till. He smiles, but this time a little more cautiously. "Sugar and lemon oil," he says. Then, after a beat, and a touch of yellow powder to keep the colour sharp. Just enough to please the eye. Perfectly safe, I'm told. You nod because you've heard that phrase before. Perfectly safe. The sort of thing said when someone has nothing to hide but everything to lose if they're questioned too much. Across the counter is a ledger. You spot a few names scribbled in. Suppliers, prices, notes like "replace with cheaper syrup if out" and "keep brighter tea near window." Not deception, just marketing, presentation, the cost of staying competitive. You ask if business is good. Busy enough, he says. But people are pickier now. They tap the bread, smell the sweets. Some even ask if I've boiled the milk myself. He chuckles, but there's a note of fatigue in it. I don't mind it, really. Means they care. Means they're paying attention. You thank him and head out again, stepping over a puddle that glints with flakes of sugar and dust. The city feels louder now. Not in noise, but in attention. People are noticing things, asking questions, choosing when they can. But for every shop that adapts, another digs in. 2 doors down, a grocer advertises real tea, imported and pure. You walk in and see bins of loose leaf already tinged with artificial colour, topped with a bit of extra dust for volume. A boy behind the counter scoops you a sample with a wink. Good strong brew, that one. You don't have to test it to know the strength comes from iron filings, not a Sam. It's the oldest story in the book. Honesty costs more, but honesty is starting to sell. As you leave the grocer's shop, you start to see the city with a sharper lens. Every corner of the market is now a kind of test, of price, of quality, of trust. You pass one vendor offering fresh daily custard tarts from a cart, their surfaces glazed to a perfect sheen. But now you wonder, what's under that shine? A dab of egg, perhaps? Or more likely a dusting of yellow colouring mixed into starch and milk to mimic richness? You don't stop to ask. You already know the answer. A few streets over, another kind of battle is taking place. 2 shops sit side by side. One tidy, minimal boasting signs that say things like unadulterated, no additives. The other brighter, louder, with a window full of glistening jellies, coloured loaves and cut sweets that sparkle in unnatural hues. A woman stands between them, basket in hand. She glances left, then right. Finally she walks into the quieter shop. That's what change looks like. Small, careful, but real. You slip into the busier shop out of curiosity. The shopkeeper is chatting cheerfully with 2 customers as he spoons what looks like strawberry jam into paper tubs. Can't keep it on the shelves, he says. Same recipe we've always used. But you notice the jar under the counter. Beet pulp, dyed and sweetened, with a little apple jelly stirred in. Clever, economical, and not technically dishonest. Strawberry flavoured was never the same as strawberry filled. He spots you watching and winks. Everything's a blend these days, friend. The trick is knowing which way to stir. You buy nothing, but he doesn't seem to mind. He's selling to people who don't ask, and many still don't. Yet just around the corner, you see a stall with a small crowd gathered. A young man stands beside a table covered in simple baked goods. Dark loaves, seed cakes, plain scones. No coloured frosting, no fancy wrapping. Just brown paper bags and a sign that says, "Ask what's in it." And people are asking. He answers calmly, honestly. One woman inquires about sweeteners. "Just treacle," he replies. "No saccharine, no powder." Another asks about flour. "Stone ground rye, local." A man inspects a biscuit, sniffs it, and buys a dozen. The food isn't dazzling, but it's steady. It feels trustworthy. You stay a while, watching the flow of conversation. Some ask out of genuine concern. Others just want to feel a little more involved in what they're putting on the table. The act of questioning becomes its own small comfort. And that's what you realise now. Trust is beginning to matter more than gloss. Not everywhere, not always, but enough. Enough to make one baker try a little harder. Enough to make one grocer relabel his tins. enough to keep one chemist's vinegar test in high demand. As dusk settles again, you pass a pub where workers sip thin ale and nibble meat pies. You overhear one of them say, "Did you hear they've started testing the vinegar now?" His friend laughs, but not dismissively, more like someone amused by how fast the world is catching up. In a city built on speed and shortcuts, truth is becoming fashionable, not flashy, not dominant, but visible. And that might be enough to shift the scales. One honest slice, one suspicious sniff, one shopper's second thought at a time. The swindle isn't over, but now the customers are watching. As the city wakes to another day, coal dust in the air, shopkeepers lifting their shutters, carts already rolling toward the markets, you walk toward a quieter street. Not the main road where signs shout and prices race to the bottom, but a narrow lane where the windows are smaller, the shop fronts older, and the people, it seems, more deliberate. You're headed to a house you heard mentioned at the chemist's. No sign on the door, no wares in the window, just a brass knocker and the faint smell of flour. A woman answers, aproned, sharp-eyed, and busy, even as she welcomes you in. Her hands are dusted with sugar and spice, and the scent of warm baking clings to the narrow hallway. She leads you through the back, where a table is set with small tins, recipe cards, and rows of folded leaflets with titles like "Don't be fooled by a shiny loaf" and "How to tell cochineal from copper." She's not a scientist, not a grocer, not a politician. She's a widow with 3 children and a passion for knowing what goes into her food. And over time she's become a quiet storm in the neighbourhood, handing out guides, sharing tips, even hosting weekly gatherings where housewives and boarders swap knowledge like recipes. You sit as she slides a tray of spice buns from the oven. No gloss, no false shine, just soft brown crust and a dusting of real sugar. "People thought I was mad at first," she says, wiping her hands, "asking what's in the jam, sniffing the bread before buying, but then they started noticing too. It began with her daughter's cough," she tells you, a persistent tickle that never quite left. The doctor said it was nothing, but after switching milk vendors it stopped. That's when she began asking questions. Now she keeps a log, vendors she trusts, products she avoids, which stalls add starch to their cocoa, and which meat pies change colour too quickly. Others have joined her. One woman brings vinegar to test flour. Another clips newspaper lists of suspicious ingredients. They meet once a week over tea and oat biscuits to compare notes, trade safe recipes and write letters to shopkeepers, to local councils, even to the editors of small papers. None of them scream, none of them march. They just document, ask, share, and it's working. She shows you a letter she received last week from a nearby grocer who stopped colouring his sweets, not because of law, but because of her customers. They were asking, and he got tired of explaining. You smile. There's a warmth to this kind of activism, practical, polite, persistent. It's not about outrage, it's about agency, about knowing what's on your plate, about helping others do the same. She hands you a folded paper, how to spot real tea, and slips a biscuit into your hand as you leave. And as you walk back toward the bustle of the main road, it occurs to you, not all change begins in Parliament. Some of it begins around kitchen tables, with flour-dusted hands, with one woman asking one question, one market morning at a time. You tuck the biscuit into your coat pocket and carry the folded paper with you, its corners already soft from the heat of your hand. How to spot real tea. A few weeks ago it might have seemed odd, fussy perhaps, but now it feels like armour. Back on the main road the contrast is stark. Shop windows glitter with coloured sweets. Loaves shine beneath glass. Tins promise pure, fresh, authentic. But now you know, Those words are decoration, not evidence. It's the quiet habits that hold the truth. Who you trust, what you notice, how you choose. You see more signs of it now. A grocer's ledger left open on a counter, where once it might have held only prices, now includes columns labelled no additive and tested. A baker has set out 2 kinds of bread, regular white and no alum. The latter cost a penny more, but it's selling faster. And across the street a mother is guiding her son through the market. You hear her say, "Not from that one, love. He uses the chalk sugar." Her voice isn't angry, just practiced. It's happening. One woman's quiet campaign has become a neighbourhood murmur, a shared look, a neighbour's tip, a ripple of caution disguised as common sense. But it's not without pushback. You pass a seller arguing with a customer. "That jam's fine. I've eaten it myself," he insists. The woman shakes her head. "Then why does it stain the spoon?" He throws up his hands. You people hear one rumour and think you're all scientists. It's not a fight exactly, just tension. The food business in the city has always relied on speed and volume. Now it's being asked to account for itself. That's new, and not everyone likes it. But the power of the women, these quiet observers, these food watchers, is that they don't need confrontation. Their strength is accumulation. They gather knowledge like they gather recipes, little by little, folded and shared, a whisper here, a note there, until enough people begin to ask the same question at the same stall, and no vendor wants to be the one left answering awkwardly. You step into a tea shop for warmth. The smell is rich, malty and slightly earthy. You ask about the leaves. The young clerk offers a smile and a tin to inspect. "No colouring, no sweepings," he says. "We've had customers asking more lately." He shrugs. "I suppose that's good." You nod. It is good. Not because it's revolution, but because it's stewardship. A city learning to watch itself. People reclaiming their right to know what they're being sold, not with pitchforks or outrage, but with curiosity and a teaspoon of vinegar. And back in that quiet lane, a tray of spice buns is cooling on a windowsill. A group of women is folding paper guides and tying them with twine. Not crusaders, not reformers, just people who care about what they feed their families. And that gentle, persistent human is how the tide begins to turn, one kitchen at a time, one bun at a time, one question at a time. By now you've walked through enough shops and stalls to recognise the signs. Not the printed ones, the real signs. The pink that's just a little too pink. The bread that breaks like sponge instead of crust. The sweets that glisten unnaturally in the shade. And now, the quiet churn of something new. Factories. You leave the crowded lanes of grocers and sweet sellers and head toward the outskirts of the city, where the buildings stretch taller and the air grows stiller. Brick by brick, London has begun to shift from stalls and counters to something far more powerful: production lines. Ahead is one of the newer structures, long, low and windowless save for a few high panes smudged with soot. A wooden sign above the door reads, "Creighton's Foods Lusted." The scent hits you before you're inside. Sugar, grease, and something floury that's difficult to place. It doesn't smell bad exactly, just uniform. The foreman meets you at the loading bay. He's brisk but not unfriendly, proud of the machines he's about to show you. Inside, it's a different world. Rows of gears and belts move in rhythm. Large drums churn thick, golden syrup that flows down metal chutes into trays. At one end of the room, dough is portioned, pressed and shaped by machine arms, each loaf identical to the one before it. No baker's hands here, no flour dust on aprons, just levers, steel and timing. Efficiency, the foreman says with a certain gleam. That's the future. You watch as rows of biscuits are stamped and transferred to cooling racks by conveyor. A boy brushes them with a light syrup. Makes them shine better, the foreman notes. Even the ones that sit on shelves a while still look fresh. You peer closer. They do look good. Round, golden and faintly sweet smelling. But that shine, it's not sugar glaze. It's likely a blend of margarine and starch, with a hint of colourant to enhance the hue. At another station, tins of meat essence are being filled. You ask what's in them. The man chuckles. Oh, beef extract, salt, flour, a bit of yeast. Enough to flavour water if you're making soup. No actual beef, of course. Not much room in the budget for that. He says it casually, not with pride, but with practicality. You walk past stacked crates labelled fruit cakes, long keep, and notice something else. No fruit in sight. Raisin bits made of dyed turnip. Glassy cherries composed of apple pulp and colouring. It's not deception in the old sense. It's manufacture. Everything here is standardised, replicable, scalable, and that's the point. This isn't about feeding one family, it's about feeding thousands. With food that lasts, ships well and doesn't change. You ask the foreman how much real fruit they use. He shrugs. Depends on the market. Sometimes none, sometimes a bit. People don't taste the difference if the spice is strong enough. And again, that strange mix of honesty and compromise. Factories like this were designed to meet demand. Demand that cities created. Demand that work hours enforced. Demand that profit margins insisted on. There's no villain here. Just flour, syrup, colour and motion. A biscuit rolls off the line and into a tin. You pick it up. And for a moment it's hard to say whether it's food or product. You walk deeper into the factory, past rows of stacked tins labelled tea cakes, breakfast rounds and luncheon bars. Everything has a label. Everything is portioned, boxed and ready to ship. Goes to rail depots tomorrow, the foreman tells you, tapping a clipboard. Some to Manchester, some to the docks. Some even head abroad. Abroad? He nods. The colonies eat this stuff up, same packaging, sometimes with a different stamp. He doesn't say this with pride, just inevitability. And that's when it really strikes you. Victorian junk food, these bright biscuits, flavoured teas, quick puddings, weren't just feeding London. They were becoming exports, symbols of convenience, of empire, of control. You pause beside a crate marked lemon drops, fine quality. One has broken open, and the candies spill across the wooden floor like tiny jewels. But up close they're less dazzling. The colours are dulled by dust, and you notice how they stick slightly to one another. Not because they're fresh, but because they're glazed with something that resists air. You ask what gives them their flavour. Lemon oil, or sometimes essence. From coal tar, mostly, the foreman replies. Smells right, so it's good enough. He sees your look and adds, doesn't hurt anyone, at least no one we hear from. You let the words hang in the air as a trolley squeaks past. On it, tins of condensed milk, boxes of starch biscuits, bars labelled fortified breakfast paste. Everything shelf-stable, everything designed to survive months in storage, weeks in travel and minutes in someone's stomach. This is food as function. Food that moves with the empire. Food that doesn't rot, because nothing inside it was ever fully alive to begin with. You ask what happens when people complain. Sometimes they write, he says, or newspapers pick something up. Then we change the wording, or the packaging, maybe swap one essence for another. It quiets down. You nod. You've seen that before? How the words on the tin shift just fast enough to stay ahead of the truth. No beef becomes beef flavoured. Fruit cake becomes spiced cake with fruit essence. Pure tea becomes tea blend. Finest quality. Accuracy dances just outside reach. The workers here don't seem bothered. They chat, stack, stir, seal. Some smile as they taste samples fresh from the line. To them, this isn't deception. It's industry, progress, the miracle of being able to feed so many, so fast, with so little. And you can't help but be struck by the scale. Dozens of people, hundreds of tins, thousands of packages, moving outward like clockwork. Each one holds not just food, but the illusion of comfort, the feeling of fullness, the memory of a flavour. And for millions across Britain, and soon the world, that's enough. As you exit the factory, the air feels different, smokier, thicker. You can still smell syrup clinging to your coat. In the distance, the whistle of a train reminds you that those crates are already on the move. The age of handmade treats is fading. The age of manufactured taste has arrived. The day has grown long and your feet are beginning to ache. But curiosity pulls you onward, this time towards something deceptively simple. A cup of tea. Not a meal, not a treat, just a break. A quiet comfort that everyone, from the factory floor to the drawing room, seems to hold sacred. You turn into a small tea room tucked between a haberdasher and a tobacconist. It's modest. A row of bentwood chairs, chipped porcelain cups, a counter stacked with buns and bread and butter slices. But the room hums with quiet conversation, soft clinks of saucers, steam curling in slow ribbons above every cup. You sit, order a pot of strong, and listen. At the next table, two clerks talk about the week's wages. Behind them, an older couple shares a plate of seed cake and stares out the window in silence. The tea arrives, dark, rich-smelling, faintly metallic. You pour, sip, and immediately feel the familiar jolt, the warmth, the bitterness, the comfort. But then you notice it. There's a strange aftertaste, slightly sour, slightly flat. The colour too seems a bit too dark, almost inky. You swirl the liquid and watch how it moves. Heavy, sluggish. You remember what the pamphlet said. If your tea leaves stain your fingers or turn the paper black, they've likely been used and dyed, and now you're tasting that warning. It wasn't uncommon. In fact, it was practically standard. Victorian tea, especially the affordable kind, was often a second-hand product. Sweepings from the floor of warehouses, leaves already steeped and dried again, then recoloured with iron salts, carbon black or indigo to restore their boldness. Some batches even included fragments of other leaves, foreign, bitter, unrelated to Camellia sinensis, all mixed in to fill out the weight. A strong brew? Absolutely. But not in the way people imagined. You flag down the tea room girl and ask gently what blend they use. She frowns. Same as always, loosely from Medley and Sons. Good quality. Folks like it strong. And that was the goal. Strength, not subtlety. For most, a good cup of tea meant one thing. Dark, hot, and fast. If it could hold up to milk and 3 spoons of sugar, it was perfect. And if the colour came from dye instead of the leaf, who would ever know? Especially when most cups were more milk than tea anyway. You sip again, this time slower. There's still warmth in it, still that soothing pause. And perhaps that's why people didn't ask more questions. Because tea wasn't about ingredients, it was about ritual. About 5 minutes away from the noise, the dust, the shoes that pinched, and the factories that never stopped. And in that way, even dyed, adulterated tea still served its purpose. The woman beside you adds 2 lumps of sugar and stirs slowly. Her expression softens, her shoulders relax. Whatever was in her cup, it's working. So you finish yours too, not because it's perfect, but because it's enough. As you place your empty cup back, on the saucer, you notice the faint ring it leaves behind, almost a greyish tint where the tea settled. It's harmless, probably, but now you know it might be more than just tannin. You step out into the street once more. The city is cooling quickly. Smoke from the chimneys begins to flatten against the rooftops, and the yellow light from gas lamps spills in ribbons along the cobblestones. It's the hour when everything softens, shops closing, boots slowing, voices quieting. But you still have one more stop in mind. You follow a narrow alley toward a shop you've only heard about in passing. One that doesn't sell tea, but buys it. A tea broker. It's a low building near the docks, built from soot-streaked stone and filled, you imagine, with crates and scales and the soft rustle of leaves. Inside, the walls are stacked with samples. Open drawers reveal neat piles of dried tea, black, green, broken, twisted, powdered. A clerk greets you, then returns to sorting a new shipment. You ask if he gets many returns. He laughs. Only from the ones who know what they're drinking. He picks up a small tin and opens it. Inside are crushed leaves so dark they're almost purple. Factory floor scrapings, he says. Dried, dyed, sold again. If you steep it long enough, it'll stain your mug for a week. He shrugs and sets it aside. You ask if people care. Some, he replies. But most folks want the strongest cup at the cheapest price. Doesn't matter where it comes from. And that's the quiet heart of the issue. Taste can be taught. If an entire generation grows up drinking tea that's been dyed with ferrous sulfate, flavoured with used leaves and balanced with bicarbonate of soda, then that's the taste they expect. Anything else seems weak or wrong. Real tea, delicate, fragrant, slightly bitter, gets dismissed as watery. And so the demand for strength becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. Vendors use darker blends. Factories re-dye old leaves. Sugar hides the flaws. Milk softens the sharp edges. And no one looks too closely. The broker offers you a proper cup. His own blend, loose leaf, full-bodied but clean. You sip it slowly. It's earthy, complex. No harshness, no dye, no grit. You ask if it sells. He smiles faintly. Not much. Too subtle. People think it's gone off if it's not black as soot. You set the cup down carefully. He caps the tin and returns it to the shelf. Another crate arrives through the door, marked for blending, not for brewing. The machine hums in the back, grinding old leaves into fine dust for bagging. That's what most people will drink tomorrow morning, and likely the morning after that. But now, at least, some will pause. Some will squint at the spoon. Some will ask why their tea tastes like metal, or why it leaves a ring. And when enough people ask, even the strongest brew might finally change. You thank the broker and step out into the evening. The city is quieter now, but in kitchens across the boroughs, kettles are whistling, mugs are being filled, and in every cup, somewhere between the leaves and the steam, is a quiet question steeping. What am I drinking? The city's lights are burning low now, but inside the great stone building along the Thames, the one with its neoclassical columns and the faint smell of damp paper, candles still flicker behind tall, dusty windows. You've arrived at the House of Commons, not for a speech or a protest or a great scandal. Tonight you're here for something smaller, quieter. A session buried halfway down the evening schedule. The room isn't full. A few MPs are slouched on benches, thumbing through reports or muttering into their beards. But at the centre, a man is standing, clearing his throat and holding up a single object. A paper bag filled with barley sugar. This, he says, is what children are buying on every corner of London. A few heads lift. He opens the bag, pours a single piece into his hand and holds it up. Lovely, isn't it? He continues, with a tone that suggests it's not. Tested last week. Contains plaster of Paris, iron oxide, and traces of copper sulfate. Someone scoffs. He turns a page into notes. The white bread consumed daily by our labouring classes, found to contain alum, an astringent known to cause digestive disturbances. Another rustle of paper. The vinegar in half the shops of Lambeth, cut with sulphuric acid. A louder scoff now. "So what?" one MP mutters. "It's vinegar. The poor have eaten worse." You sit quietly in the gallery watching. This isn't a dramatic moment. It won't be printed on the front page. It's not the kind of speech that stirs revolutions, but it matters. Because for the first time, the conversation about food, the one that's been whispered in kitchens and scrawled in pamphlets and tested behind chemist counters, is entering the official record. The man speaking now isn't demanding bans. He's asking for definitions. What is food? What should it contain? Who decides? But the resistance is thick. Is it the government's job, another MP asks, to stop a man from buying a cheap sweet? Would you have us inspect every loaf in every baker's window? Another chuckles. The room hums with polite dismissal. The speaker sits down, and yet, you feel it. The tension has shifted. The mere fact that these words were said in this room makes them real. You glance toward the clerk's table, where a pile of letters has been delivered. Public appeals from housewives, local doctors, food testers, and even school teachers. Each signed, folded, marked with ink and intent. Their words aren't loud, but they've arrived. One letter, still open, reads, "We do not demand luxury, only safety. We ask not for cream, but for milk. We ask not for fruit, but for jam that is not plaster." You leave before the vote. There won't be one tonight. No bill passed, no amendment tabled. But you walk out differently than you entered, because now the conversation isn't just behind the counter, or in the test room, or at the kitchen table. It's in Parliament. And Parliament, slow, sleepy, stubborn though it may be, has begun to listen. Back out on the street, the Parliament building fades behind you like the last glow of a lantern. The gaslight flickers in puddles left by a passing cart. It's quiet now. Too late for deliveries, too early for bakers. But your feet carry you toward another building, smaller but no less important. You step into the reading room of a modest but well-kept borough library. Here, amid the hush of pages turning and boots scraping on matting, another kind of battle is underway. It's being fought with ink, pamphlets, and quiet determination. You move toward a display set out near the entrance. The latest circular from the Lancet Analytical Commission sits atop a small wooden stand, its headline plain but heavy. Results of food adulteration testing, borough markets, October. You read through it slowly. Borax in butter, copper sulfate in pickles, lead in cider, chalk in sugar. Each line lands with a quiet thud. Not just because of what's listed, but because of what's not. No brands, no names, just categories and compounds. Enough to raise concern, but not enough to point fingers. And yet, people are paying attention. You notice someone beside you, a man in a shopkeeper's apron, brows furrowed as he scans the same sheet. "Trying to see if my vinegar made the list," he mutters, only half joking. You ask if it worries him. "Of course it does," he says, "but I can't charge more than the man next door. And if he waters his milk, I have to, or I lose the trade." He folds the paper carefully, almost apologetically. We all know it's wrong, but until it's illegal, it's just business. That word again. Business. The shield. The excuse. The chain that binds even the well-meaning to a system that rewards the worst instincts. You leave the reading room with a small copy of the pamphlet tucked in your coat. It was free, paid for by a coalition of physicians and volunteers who believe education is the only weapon strong enough to change anything. And in drawing rooms across the country, similar papers are being passed from hand to hand. Some dismiss them, some scoff, but others frown. Others think twice before buying that next jar of jam. Others whisper over the dinner table, "Do you think our grocer adds plaster? It's not revolution. It's not even reform. Not yet." but it's awareness. And awareness is sticky, it clings, it lingers. Once you've learned what's in your bread, you can't unlearn it. Once you've read what's in your milk, you taste it differently, and eventually that discomfort becomes demand. You pause at a newspaper vendor as you pass. Behind the broadsheets about the Crimean War and Queen Victoria's court is a slim, folded handbill. You unfold it. What's in your supper? A guide to safer buying, with advice for housewives, boarders, bachelors and working cooks. It's not Parliament, but it might just reach farther. Because if Parliament listens to letters, the market listens to feet. And if enough people stop buying poisoned sweets, or bleached bread, or green pickles glowing with copper, then even the most stubborn shopkeeper will notice. You tuck the handbill away. Just as church bells ring midnight across the rooftops, the city sleeps, but the questions do not. The following morning begins not with bells or engines, but with whispers. In the narrow lanes of Covent Garden and Clerkenwell, in the stalls of Spitalfields and the chatter of Smithfield Market, something strange is stirring. Not protests, not speeches, just murmurs. You stop by a greengrocer's stall. A woman is holding up a bunch of parsley, rubbing the leaves between her fingers. Her brow furrows. "It's too green," she mutters to the man behind the cart. He shrugs. "Fresh is what you asked for," but she doesn't let it go. "Fresh, yes. Not dyed with copper." The grocer blinks. "You been reading those papers again?" She doesn't answer. She puts the parsley down and walks away. You trail behind her through the market and begin to notice more of the same. A butcher defending the weight of his sausages, a cheesemonger explaining his brine, a flour merchant grumbling as a customer holds a pinch of white powder up to the light. No yelling, no boycotts, just eyes looking more closely, mouths asking more questions, and it rattles the vendors, because for decades they've relied on one simple truth. No one asks. No one looks too hard. If the bread is white, if the tea is strong, if the jam is red, that's enough. But now, the silence is cracking. At a small corner baker's, two shop girls are whispering behind the counter. One glances nervously at the chalkboard of daily specials. The other mutters, "That alum trick, he swears it's harmless." The first shakes her head. Doesn't matter. People are starting to notice. And that's the fear. Not exposure, but suspicion. The kind that creeps in quietly and never quite leaves. You pass a newspaper stand and the headlines are changing too. No longer buried deep in the classifieds. Now it's front page material. City Council demands flour standards. Chemist exposes tricks of pickle trade. Is your tea safe? What every family should know. It's not all out of principle, of course. Scandal sells. But it has an effect. You wander into a fish stall near Southwark. The fishmonger, arms crossed, is being questioned by an older man with a notebook. The customer pokes at a slab of haddock with a stick. "Bit too bright, don't you think?" The fishmonger scowls. "Salt and smoke, same as always." "Looks more like prussiate of potash to me." You glance down. The fish is oddly vivid, a colour somewhere between gold and orange, almost theatrical. But the seller stands firm. You want it or not? The man sighs, shakes his head, and walks away. The seller mutters under his breath, but you catch the nervous flick of his eyes toward the rest of his wares. Just last week no one would have blinked. But this week, the question is floating in the air like flour dust. What's really in this? And even if the answer stays hidden, the question alone is powerful enough to change how people shop, how they talk, even how they taste. You tuck your hands in, your coat, and keep walking. The market smells the same. Coal smoke, fresh greens, wet stone. But something beneath it is shifting. Not louder, just deeper. The shift doesn't stop at the market stalls. By mid-afternoon, It echoed in tea shops, schoolhouses, laundry yards, even in barbershops, where men who usually argue about horses and fog are suddenly debating the colour of custard. You step into a modest eating house off Fleet Street. It's not a fancy place. Just boiled meat, stewed apples, tea served in mismatched china, but every table is buzzing. At one, a pair of clerks is inspecting the mustard with great suspicion. At this price, one says, it's turmeric and starch if we're lucky. Across the room, two elderly women lean over their teacups. They say some of the cheaper teas aren't even leaves, one whispers, just dried blackberry and iron shavings. The other nods, wide-eyed. And the jam. Have you heard about the bone paste? You can't help but smile. The tone is half gossip, half horror, but the result is undeniable. People are talking, and those whispers travel fast. A little later, while passing a corner bookstall, you see a thin pamphlet propped up near the register. It's titled The Working Man's Guide to Honest Fare. Underneath, in bold, how to spot a fraudulent loaf, detect copper in pickles, and avoid poison in sweets. It's 1 penny, and it's already sold out. The man behind the stall tells you he can't keep them in stock. Printer says they'll do a second run tomorrow, maybe 2,000 copies. Folk are getting wise. You nod, thinking back to the letter on the clerk's desk at Parliament. We do not demand luxury, only safety. That same quiet plea is now rolling through alleys and shop fronts like an underground river. And some vendors, those with cleaner wares and a bit of pride, are catching on. At a bakery in Bloomsbury, a small chalkboard reads, "Bread made with water, flour, yeast, nothing else." It's not fancy, not ornate, but it's a declaration. Inside, the shelves are still half full, but the baker looks hopeful. Honest bread doesn't puff like the rest, he tells you, doesn't stay snow white, but I'd rather lose a few customers than sell poison. You ask if it's working. Some days, he says, wiping his hands. Other days, not yet. But they're noticing. That's a start. And in some boroughs, small shops have begun posting signs. No alum, no chalk, no copper. Sugar tested and weighed. Tea imported from India. No sweepings. They're not government certified. There's no badge, no system, just promises written in chalk banking on trust. But for the families walking home after a long day, tired and cautious, those promises matter. You pass a mother pointing out a sign to her young son. "Look," she says, "we'll buy from here. That other place gives you stomach aches." The boy nods solemnly. He remembers, and you realise this isn't just about Parliament or pamphlets or science. It's about memory, a bad sweet, a heavy stomach, a bitter taste that lingers, and once that memory settles, it rarely fades. You walk on as twilight sets in. Shadows stretch across cobblestones. Shop shutters begin to close. Gas lamps hiss to life. But the day isn't done, because the city, loud, dirty, overwhelming, is learning to taste its food again. And once you start tasting, really tasting, you begin to wonder what you've been swallowing all along. Night has fallen again in London, but the city hasn't quieted. It's shifted. You're standing just off Fleet Street and something is different in the air. Not the scent, though the usual fog, roasted chestnuts and river damp still linger, but the rhythm. You walk past a printing house where the windows are glowing late. Inside, compositors work fast, their fingers flying across trays of type, setting the next day's headlines. Lead letters, inked rollers, fresh sheets. It's the heartbeat of a city waking up to itself. You sneak a glance at the press briefs. One bold headline leaps out. "The chemist speaks what lurks in your bread." Right below it, a quote. "The miller may not lie, but the flour does." You smile to yourself. That line will be on every breakfast table by morning. Because now the press has joined the pantry. You duck into a nearby coffee house, and sure enough, the same article is being passed between tables like hotcakes. Young men in cravats quote it aloud. A woman in spectacles marks a paragraph with her thumbnail and shakes her head. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper rolls her eyes. "Wasn't a thing last month," she mutters. "Now everyone's a flour expert." And yet, she's changed her supplier. You sip your coffee, noticing that it's not nearly as bitter as usual. Could be the beans. Or maybe, just maybe, she's switched out that old colouring syrup for the real thing. The power of the press isn't just in scandal, it's in momentum. Because once a few papers get a hold of a story, the rest don't want to be left behind. And when it's not just about royalty or war, but you, your loaf, your jam, your family's next meal, that story grows legs. You finish your drink and step back out into the fog. Down the street, a crowd has gathered near a shop window. You move closer and find that they're not looking at a display, but at a handwritten letter posted behind the glass. It's from a local food inspector. He writes plainly, almost apologetically. Of 53 samples taken from grocers last week, 38 were found to contain harmful substitutes. This includes 6 of the most commonly purchased jams, 4 bread loaves, and 2 brands of black tea. The letter isn't official, it's a leak. Someone slipped it to the shop owner, and he in turn has decided to share it with the neighbourhood. There's no riot, no shouting, just a ripple of silence. You hear a man mumble, "That's the brand Margaret buys." A girl whispers, "We had that jam yesterday." Someone steps away quietly, a hand on their stomach as if remembering a sudden ache. The press gives information, but gossip gives it roots. You remember earlier how whispers in the market began to twist vendors' hands. Now those whispers are coming faster. The printers run at midnight, the columns multiply, and at the bottom of many pages a new voice appears. Letters to the editor, real people, real stories, names and streets. One from Hackney reads, "My youngest sickened after a sweet from Mr. Greeley's cart. The doctor found lead in it. Let mothers beware." Another from Whitechapel, "I work the bakery. We use alum every day. I want to stop, but until law forbids it, my wages won't wait." They are short, they are raw, they are unforgettable. You exhale slowly. The truth has left the chemist's lab. It's out on the street now. By the time you reach Soho, the lamplighters have made their rounds. Pools of warm yellow glow puddle on the wet cobblestones, stretching long shadows behind every cart and carriage. And just ahead, through the glass panes of a tiny bookshop, you spot it. An evening lecture just starting. You slip inside and quietly find a seat at the back. It's cramped. Bare wooden chairs, the scent of damp wool, tobacco and ink in the air. But no one seems to mind. Every eye is fixed on the man at the front who stands behind a modest desk with a single oil lamp and a jar of flour. He's not a politician, not a preacher, just a chemist, middle-aged, shirt sleeves rolled up, chalk dust on his cuffs. He dips a spoon into the jar and begins to speak, not with flair but with quiet clarity. "This," he says, holding up the flour, "was taken from a shop on Long Acre. It is sold as wheaten flour, but it is not wheat alone. It contains bone dust, a trace of alum, chalk powder, and a small amount of pipe clay." He pauses. "A mother trying to make one loaf stretch into 2 will feed her children with this, and she may never know why they cannot sleep at night." The room doesn't erupt. It doesn't need to. Instead, there's a soft wave of breath, as if 30 people just remembered what they had for supper. He continues, demonstrating tests, using vinegar to show bubbling chalk, iodine to detect starch. He's not just exposing tricks, he's teaching tools, because what good is outrage if you cannot act? After the lecture, a woman in a bonnet raises her hand. "What do we do with this knowledge, sir?" He doesn't hesitate. Share it. Share it with your neighbours, with your grocer, with your alderman, and most of all, with your children. The room is quiet again. Then someone claps, then another. And soon the small shop is filled with the quiet sound of hope disguised as applause. You step outside with a small pamphlet he's handed out. Hand-drawn illustrations show how to spot tainted tea leaves, metallic sweets, even fake cocoa. It feels like something new, not just education, but resistance, and the ripples are growing. At the next corner, a sign outside a butcher reads, "No saltpetre used here." And next to it, a clipping from today's newspaper underlined twice. Consumers are not powerless, buyers create the market. You think back to the bread seller in Bloomsbury writing his promise in chalk. Now it's catching on. Even the city's gossip rags, so quick to mock anything, earnest, are printing lists of honest shops, alongside their usual bits of scandal and satire. At a boarding house near Lambeth, you overhear a cook announcing proudly that she's found a flour vendor who doesn't mess with a loom. The residents cheer. One man, an old-timer in a waistcoat too thin for October, raises his tea and declares, "Too unadulterated living." Everyone laughs, but there's weight beneath it. The city is not fixed. Not yet. There are still barrels of tainted vinegar, still copper-dipped pickles, still powdered brick masquerading as cocoa. But the city is aware. The illusion is broken. Where once there was quiet consumption, now there is scrutiny. Where once there was fear of price, now there's a hunger for truth. And that hunger, it can't be sweetened with sugar of lead. It must be fed with something real, something honest, even if it's a little rough around the edges. You wake the next morning to a quieter London, not because the city has hushed, far from it, but because something within you has softened. Maybe it's the steady rumble of carts below the window, or the smell of hearth smoke curling through the shutters, or perhaps it's just the way the sun slants through the fog, gentler, like it's easing into the day with you. But there's another reason too. You're beginning to trust your senses again. The bread you picked up yesterday, the one from the chalk-signed shop, sits on the table. You tear off a piece. It's not the blinding white loaf you once considered ideal. It's soft but heavy, brown speckled and smells almost nutty. The crust is uneven, rough, real. You chew slowly. It's good. You glance at your cup of tea. Strong, earthy, with a hint of bitterness. Not the sugary punch of doctored blends. It's strange. With all this newfound awareness, you thought things might feel more bitter. That noticing the deceit in the food around you would make everything worse. But instead, it's the opposite. Because knowing what's in your food doesn't ruin it. It returns it. You head out for the day with a new sort of attention. The usual signs of London life greet you. Coal dust on the windowsills, cabbage boiling in alleyway pots, children darting through puddles in thick wool socks. But your eyes land, over and over again, on quiet new symbols of change. A chalkboard outside a fishmonger now reads, "No yellow dye. Asked to see the gills." At a sweet shop, 2 signs hang side by side. Licorice, 112D. No red lead, no vermilion. Even your local grocer, once notorious for mysterious flour blends, now displays a new tin on his counter labelled "Tested by Inspector Barnett, Oct. 25. It's not just marketing, it's a dance of trust. Because once a customer starts asking questions, the shopkeeper has only 2 choices: explain or lose them. You pass a group of schoolchildren huddled near a market stall. Their teacher, stern but soft-spoken, is holding up 2 apples. One was waxed with resin to keep it shiny, she says. The other was not. Tell me which you'd rather eat. The kids gasp as she slices them open. One apple is dry, the other dripping with juice. They point. They laugh, but they're learning. It's not just adults reading pamphlets and letters now. It's woven into daily life. At a boarding school you pass later that afternoon, you spot a blackboard listing lunch: stewed mutton, cabbage, barley pudding, and at the bottom a note: all ingredients confirmed by Mrs. Harmon. Kitchen open to inspection Thursdays. It's a small thing, but imagine saying that aloud just a year ago. Kitchen open to inspection. You'd have been laughed at. Now, it's a selling point. You sit on a bench near the Thames watching smoke curl from the chimneys, thinking back to all the little moments, how it began with chemists and reformers, yes, but also with grocers who couldn't sleep at night, with mothers who trusted their tongues, with workers who shared stories instead of swallowing them, and how somehow all that stirred the city, not in a thunderclap, but in a murmur, then a ripple, then a tide. And now the tide is turning. Not all at once, not with a grand proclamation from on high, but with the subtle shift of hands changing habits. You walk through Covent Garden as twilight falls. Vendors are packing up, calling out the last of their wares. A woman with arms full of turnips pauses to inspect a sign posted on the wall nearby. It reads, "Proposal for a standard food bill to be read next month in Commons." You recognise the name of the backer, a quiet member of Parliament known more for his fondness for cricket than crusades. And yet, here it is, a real motion, about real food. The conversations of housewives and clerks, bakers and butchers have echoed high enough for someone to listen. You smile, quietly. It took decades. It took poison. It took pamphlets and letters and lectures in cold rooms. It took chalkboards and tin labels and tired bakers refusing shortcuts. But something has begun. The baker on Chancery Lane has raised his prices by a halfpenny and still sells out each day. The grocer near St. Giles no longer stocks the cheapest teas and has gained new regulars who ask politely, "Is this the honest blend?" Even the old pie seller who once boasted of his glowing crusts now mutters, "No dyes, no flour stretchers, not since April." You stop by the river again, same bench as the morning, and watch barges drift down the Thames. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of salt and coal. Behind you, a boy tosses crumbs to the pigeons, thick, crusty bits that look unmistakably unadulterated. No one tells him to stop. You breathe it in. This isn't a perfect London. Not yet. You still hear rumours of bricks in cocoa, of soap sold as cheese, of miracle tonics that are mostly vinegar and dyes. But now, when someone whispers those things, they are met with raised eyebrows, not shrugs, because now people believe food can lie, and more importantly, they believe it shouldn't. That's the quiet revolution. Not a riot in the street, but a housewife walking out of a shop because she read the label. Not a child throwing away a sweet because it tasted wrong. Not fear, but discernment. And that discernment spreads faster than sickness ever did. You lean back as the sky darkens. Tomorrow the papers will run another story, perhaps about vinegar or tin cans, or something no one suspected yet. And someone else will learn. Another chalkboard will appear. Another pamphlet will be passed. Another shopkeeper will weigh the cost of honesty and decide, finally, to stop adding chalk to the flour. And somewhere a mother will slice bread, pour tea, and serve supper with the simple assurance, "This won't make us sick." It took years to ruin the nation's food, and it will take years to rebuild it. But the work has begun, not with fire, not with fury, with taste, with memory, with the courage to say, "No more." You close your eyes and let that quiet truth carry you into sleep. Let your breath slow now. The city fades into a soft hum behind you. Lamplit streets, distant footsteps. the last roll of a cart on cobblestones. But you don't need to chase the story any further. You've walked through the heart of it. You've seen how something as simple as bread can carry the weight of an entire era. How jam and tea, vinegar and flour, items once taken for granted, became battlegrounds for dignity. And yet, somehow, it was never about outrage alone. It was about care. The care of a mother watching her child sleep after a safe supper. The care of a grocer who chose honesty over margin. The care of a chemist tucked in a cold room, testing sugar cubes late into the night. That kind of care doesn't make noise, it doesn't earn statues, but it changes everything. So now, as you settle into your own quiet evening, know this. History wasn't always loud. Sometimes it moved in teaspoons, in crumbs, in quiet refusals to sell poison, no matter how small the profit. And somewhere, tucked behind all the noise of the Victorian age, was the gentle revolution of people who simply wanted their food to be real. So breathe easy. Let the fog roll gently across your thoughts and fall asleep with this comfort. You know what's in your bread, and that sometimes is enough.